A Walk to Remember, Nicholas Sparks. Prologue. When I was 17, my life changed forever. I know that there are people who wonder about me when I say this. They look at me strangely as if trying to fathom what could have happened back then, though I seldom bother to explain because I have lived here for most of my life. I don't feel that I have to unless it's on my terms, and that would take more time than most people are willing to give me. My story cannot be summed up in two or three sentences. It cannot be packed into something neat and simple that people would immediately understand. Despite the passage of 40 years, the people still living here who knew me that year accept my lack of explanation without question. My story, in some ways, is their story because it was something that all of us lived through. It was I, however, who was closest to it. I am 57 years old, but even now I can remember everything from that year, down to the smallest details. I relive that year often in my mind, bringing it back to life, and I realize that when I do, I always feel a strange combination of sadness and joy. There are moments when I wish I could roll back the clock and take all the sadness away, but I have the feeling that if I did, the joy would be gone as well. So I take the memories as they come, accepting them all, letting them guide me whenever I can. This happens more often than I let on. It is April 12th in the last year before the millennium, and as I leave my house, I glance around. The sky is overcast and grey. But as I move down the street, I notice that the dogwoods and azaleas are booming. I zip my jacket just a little. The temperature is cool, though I know it's only a matter of weeks before it will settle into something comfortable and the grey skies give way to the kind of days that make North Carolina one of the most beautiful places in the world. With a sigh, I feel it all coming back to me. I close my eyes and the years begin to move in reverse, slowly ticking backward, like the hands of a clock rotating in the wrong direction. As if through someone else's eyes, I watch myself grow younger. I see my hair changing from grey to brown. I feel the wrinkles around my eyes begin to smooth. My legs and arms grow sinewy. Lessons I have learned with age grow dimmer, and my innocence returns as that eventful year approaches. Then, like me, the world begins to change. Roads narrow and some become gravel. Suburban sprawl has been replaced with farmland. Downtown streets teem with people, looking in windows as they pass Sweeney's Bakery and Polka's Meat Shop. Men wear hats, women wear dresses. At the courthouse of the street, the bell tower rings. I open my eyes and pause. I am standing outside the Baptist church, and when I stare at the gable, I know exactly who I am. My name is Landon Carter, and I'm 17 years old. This is my story. I promise to leave nothing out. First, you will smile, and then you will cry. Don't say you have not been warned. Chapter 1. In 1958, Beaufort, North Carolina, which is located on the coast near Morehead City, was a place like many other small southern towns. It was the kind of place where the humidity rose so high in the summer that walking out to get the mall made a person feel like as if he needed a shower, and kids walked around barefoot from April through October beneath oak trees, draped in Spanish moss. People waved from their cars whenever they saw someone on the street, whether they knew him or not, and the air smelled of pine, salt, and sea, a scent unique to the Carolinas. For many of the people there, fishing in the Palmico Sound or crabbing in the News River was a way of life, and the boats were moored whenever you saw the intercoastal waterway. Only three channels came in on the television, though television was never important to those of us who grew up there. Instead, our lives were centered around the churches, of which there were 18 within the town limits. They went by the names like Fellowship Hall Christian Church, the Church of the Forgiven People, the Church of Sunday Atonement, and then, of course, there were the Baptist churches. When I was growing up, it was far and away the most popular denomination around, and there were Baptist churches on practically every corner of town. Though each considered itself superior to others, there were Baptist churches of every type: Free Will Baptist, Southern Baptist, Congregational Baptist, Missionary Baptist, Independent Baptist. Well, you get the picture. Back then, the big event of the year was sponsored by Baptist Church downtown Southern. If you really want to know, in conjunction with the local high school, every year they put on their Christmas pageant at Beaufort Playhouse, which was actually a play that had been written by Hegbert Sullivan, a minister who had been with the church since Moses parted the Red Sea. Okay, maybe he wasn't that old, but he was old enough that you could almost see through the guy's skin. It was sort of clammy all the time, and translucent kids would swear they actually saw the blood flowing through his veins, and his hair was as white as those bunnies you see in petty stores around Easter. Anyway, he wrote this play called The Christmas Angel because he did not want to keep on performing that old Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol. In his mind, Scrooge was a heathen who came to his redemption only because he saw ghosts, not angels, and who was to say whether they had been sent by God anyway, and who was to say he would not revert to his sinful ways if they had not been sent directly from heaven. The play did not exactly tell you in the end. It sort of plays into faith and all, but Hegbert did not trust ghosts if they were not actually sent by God, which was not explained in plain language, and this was his big problem with it. A few years back, he had changed the end of the play, sort of followed it up with his own version, complete with old man Scrooge becoming a preacher and all, heading off to Jerusalem to find the place where Jesus once taught the scribes. It did not fly too well, not even to the congregation who sat in the audience, starting wide-eyed at the spectacle, and the newspaper said things like, though it was certainly interesting, it was not exactly the play we have all come to know and love. So Egbert decided to try his hand at writing his own play. He had written his own sermons his whole life, and some of them, we had to admit, were actually interesting, especially when he talked about the wrath of God coming down on the fornicators and all that good stuffs. They really got his blood boiling. I'll tell you, when he talked about the fornicators, that was his real hot spot. When we were younger, my friends and I would hide behind the trees and shout, Egbert is a fornicator. When we saw him walking down the street, and we would giggle like idiots, like we were the wittiest creature ever to inhabit the planet. Old Egbert. He would stop dead in his track and his ears would perk up. I swear to God, they actually moved, and he would turn his bright shade of red like he had just drunk gasoline, and the big green piles in his neck would start sticking out all over, like those maps of the Amazon River that you see in National Geographic. He would peer from side to side, his eyes narrowing into slits as he searched for us, and then, just as suddenly he had started to go pale again, back to that fishy skin right before our eyes. Boy, it was something to watch, that's for sure. So we'd be hiding behind a tree, and Egbert, what kind of parents name their kid Egbert anyway, would stand there waiting for us to give ourselves up, as if he thought we'd be that stupid. We would put our hands over our mouths to keep them from laughing out loud, but somehow he would always zero in us. He would be turning from side to side, and then he would stop, those beady eyes coming right at us, right through the tree. I know who you are, Landon Carter, he would say, and the Lord knows too. He would let that sink in for a minute or so, and then he would finally head off again. And during the sermon that weekend, he would stare right at us and say something like, God is merciful to children, but children must be worthy as well. And we would sort of lower ourselves in the seats, and not from embarrassment, but to hide a new round of giggles. Hugbert did not understand us at all, which was really sort of strange, being that he had a kid and all. But then again, she was a girl. More on that, though, later. Anyway, like I said, Hugbert wrote the Christmas Angel one year and decided to put on that play instead. The play itself was not bad, actually, which surprised everyone the first year it was performed. It is basically the story of a man who had lost his wife few years back. This guy, Thornton, used to be real religious, but he had a crisis of faith after his wife died during childbirth. He is raising this little girl all on his own, but he has not been the greatest father. And what the little girl really wants for Christmas is a special music box with an angel engraved on top, a picture of which she would cut out from an old catalog. The guy searches long and hard to find the gift, but he cannot find it anywhere. So it's Christmas Eve and he is still searching, and while he is out looking through the stores, he comes across the strange woman he has never seen before, and she promises to help him find the gift for his daughter. First, though, they help this homeless person. Back then, they were called bums, by the way. Then, They stop at an orphanage to see some kids, then visit a lovely old woman who was just wanted some company on Christmas Eve. At this point, the mysterious woman asks Tom Thornton what he wants for Christmas, and he says that he wants his wife back. She brings him to the city fountain and tells him to look in the water, and he will find what he is looking for. When he looks in the water, he sees the face of his little girl, and he breaks down and cries right there. While he is sobbing, the mysterious lady runs off, and Tom Thornton searches but cannot find her anywhere. Eventually, he heads home. The lessons from the evening playing in his mind. He walks into his little girl's room, and her sleeping figure makes him realize that she is all he has left of his wife. And he starts to cry again because he knows he hasn't been a good enough father to her. The next morning, magically, the music box is underneath the tree. The angel that's engraved on it looks exactly like the woman he had seen the night before. So it was not that bad, really. If truth be told, people cried buckets whenever they saw it. The play sold out every year it was performed, and due to its popularity, Hegbert eventually had to move it from the church to the Beaufort Playhouse, which had a lot more seating by the time I was a senior in high school. The performances ran twice to packed houses, which, considering who actually performed it, was a story in and of itself. You see, Hegbert wanted young people to perform the play seniors in high school, not the theater group. I reckon he thought it would be a good learning experience before the seniors headed off to the college and came face to face with all the fornicators. He was that kind of guy, you know, always wanting to save us from temptation. He wanted us to know that God is out there watching you, even when you are away from home, and that if you put your trust in God, you will be all right in the end. It was a lesson that I would eventually learn in time, though it was not Hegbert who taught me. As I said before, Beaufort was fairly typical as far as southern towns went, though it did have an interesting history. Blackbeard, the pirate, once owned a house there, and his ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, is supposedly buried somewhere in the sand just offshore. Recently, some archaeologists or oceanographers or whoever looks stops like that said they found it, but no one is certain just yet, being that it sank over 250 years ago, and you cannot exactly reach into the globe compartment and check the registration. Beaufort's come a long way since 1950s, but it is still not exactly a major metropolis or anything. Beaufort was and always will be on the smallish side, but when I was growing up, it barely warned a place on the map. To put it into perspective, the congressional district that included Beaufort covered the entire eastern part of the state, some 20,000 square miles, and there was not a single town with more than 25,000 people. Even compared with the towns, Beaufort was regarded as being on the small side. Everything east of Raleigh and north of Wilmington, all the way to Virginia border, was a district my father represented. I suppose you have heard of him. He is sort of a legend even now. His name is Worth Carter, and he was a congressman for almost 30 years. His slogan every other year during the election season was Worth Carter represent, and the person was supposed to fill in the city name where he or she lived. I can remember driving on trips when me and mom had lived. I can remember to make our appearances to show the people he was a true family man. That we would see those bumper stickers stenciled in with names like Oathway and Coca-Winity and Seven Springs. Nowadays, stuffs like that would not fly. But back then, that was fairly sophisticated publicity. I imagine if he tried to do that now, people opposing him would insert all sort of foul language in the blank space. But we never saw it once. Okay, maybe once. A farmer from Duplin County once wrote the word sit in the blank space, and when my mom saw it, she covered my eyes and said a prayer asking for forgiveness for the poor ignorant bastard. She did not say exactly those words, but I got the gist of it. So my father, congressman, was a big wig, and everyone but everyone knew it, including old man Hegbert. Now, the two of them did not get along, not at all, despite the fact that my father went to Hegbert's church whenever he was in town, which to be frank was not all that often. Hegbert, in addition to his belief that fornicators were destined to clean the urinals in hells, also believed that communism was a sickness that doomed mankind to heathenhood. Even though heathenhood was not a word I can find it in any dictionary, the congregation knew what he meant. They also knew that he was directing his words specifically to my father, who would sit with his eyes closed and pretend not to listen. My father on one of the house committees that oversaw the red influence, supposedly infiltrating every aspect of the country, including national defense, higher education, and even tobacco farming. You have to remember that this was during the Cold War. Tensions were running high, and we North Carolinians needed something to bring it down to a more personal level. My father had consistently looked for facts, which were irrelevant to people like Hegbert. Afterward, my father would come home after the service. He would say something like, Reverend Sullivan was in the rare form today. I hope you heard that part about the scripture where Jesus was talking about the poor. Yeah, sure, Dad. My father tried to diffuse situations whenever possible. I think that's why he stayed in Congress for so long. The guy could kiss the ugliest babies known to the mankind and still come up with something nice to say. He's such a gentle child. He would say when a baby had a giant head, or I'll bet she's the sweetest girl in the world if she had a birthmark over her entire face. One time, a lady showed up with a kid in a wheelchair. My father took one look at him and said, I'll bet you 10 to 1 that you are the smartest kid in your class. And he was. Yeah, my father was great at stuff like that. He could fling it with the best of him, that's for sure. And he was not such a bad guy, not really. Especially if you consider the fact that he did not beat me or anything. But he was not there for me growing up. I hate to say, because nowadays people claim that sort of stuffs even if their parent was around, and use it to excuse their behavior. My dad, he did not love me. That's why I became a stripper and performed on the Jerry Springer show. I'm not using it to excuse the person I've become. I'm simply saying it as a fact. My father was gone 9 months of the year, living out of the town in Washington, D.C. Apartment 300 miles away. My mother did not go with him because both of them wanted to grow up the same way they had. Of course, my father's fathers took him hunting and fishing, taught him to play ball, showed up for birthday parties, and all that small stuff that adds up to quite a bit before adulthood. My father, on the other hand, was a stranger, someone I barely knew at all. For the first 5 years of my life, I thought all fathers lived somewhere else. It was not until my best friend Eric Hunter asked me in the kindergarten who that guy was who showed up at my house the night before that I realized something was not quite right about the situation. He is my father, I said proudly. Oh, Eric said as he rifled through my lunchbox, looking for my Milky Way. I didn't know you had a father. Talk about something whacking you straight in the face. So I grew up under the care of my mother. Now, she was a nice lady, sweet and gentle, the kind of mother most people dream about. But she wasn't, nor could she ever be, a manly influence in my life. And that fact, coupled with my growing disillusionment with my father, made me become something of a rebel, even at a young age. Not a bad one, mind you. Me and my friends might sneak out late and soap up car windows now and then, or eat boiled peanuts in the graveyard behind the church. But in the 50s, that was the kind of things that made other parents shake their heads and whisper to their children, "You don't want to be like that Carter boy. He is on the fast track to prison." Me, a bad boy, for eating boiled peanuts in the graveyard? Go figure. Anyway, my father and Hugbert did not get along, but it was not only because of politics. No, it seems that my father and Hugbert knew each other from way back when. Hugbert was about 20 years older than my father, and back before he was a minister. He used to work for my father's father. My grandfather, even though he spent lots of time with my father, was a true bastard, if there was one. He was the one, by the way, who made my family fortune. But I don't want you to imagine him as sort of a man who slaved over his business, working diligently and watching it grow, prospering slowly over time. My grandfather was much shrewder than that. The way he made his money was simple. He started as a bootlegger, accumulating wealth throughout Prohibition by running rum up from Cuba. Then he began buying land and hiring sharecroppers to work it. He took 90% of the money the sharecroppers made on their tobacco crop, then loaned them money whenever they needed it at ridiculous interest rates. Of course, he never intended to collect the money. Instead, he would foreclose on any land or equipment they happened to own. Then, in what he called his moment of inspiration, he started a bank called Carter Banking and Loan. The only other bank in 2 county radius had mysteriously burned down, and with the onset of depression, it never reopened. Though everyone knew what had really happened, not a word was ever spoken for fear of retribution, and their fear was well placed. the bank was not the only building that had mysteriously burned down. His interest rates were outrageous, and little by little he began amassing more land and property as people defaulted on their loans. When the depression hit hardest, he foreclosed on dozens of businesses throughout the country while retaining the original owners to continue to work on salary, paying them just enough to keep them where they were because they had nowhere else to go. He told them that when the economy improved, he would sell their business back to them, and people always believed him. Never once, however, did he keep his promise. In the end, he controlled a vast portion of the country's economy, and he abused his clout in every way imaginable. I'd like to tell you, he eventually went to a terrible death, but he did not. He died at a ripe old age while sleeping with his mistress on his yacht off the Cayman Island. He would outlived both his wives and his only son. Some end for a guy like that, huh? Life. I have learned is never fair. If people teach anything in school, that should be it. But back to the story. Egbert. Once he realized what a bastard my grandfather really was, quit working for him and went into the ministry. Then came back to Beaufort and he started ministering in the same church we attended. He spent his first few years perfecting his fire and brimstone act with monthly sermons on the evils of the greedy, and this left him scant time for anything else. He was 43 before he ever got married. He was 55 when his daughter Jamie Sullivan was born. His wife, a wispy little thing 20 years younger than he, went through 6 miscarriages before Jamie was born. And in the end, she died in childbirth, making Egbert a widower who had to raise a daughter on his own. Hence, of course, the story behind the play. People knew the story even before the play was first performed. It was one of those stories that made its round whenever Egbert had to baptize a baby or attend a funeral. Everyone knew about it, and that's why I think so many people got emotional. Whenever they saw the Christmas play, they knew it was based on something that happened in real life, which gave it special meaning. Jamie Sullivan was a senior in high school, just like me, and she had already been chosen to play the angel, not that anyone else even had a chance. This, of course, made the play extra special that year. It was going to be a big deal, maybe the biggest ever, at least in Miss Garber's mind. She was the drama teacher, and she was already glowing about the possibilities the first time I met her in class. Now, I hadn't really planned on taking drama that year. I really hadn't, but it was either that or chemistry. The thing was, I thought it would be a blow off class, especially when compared with my other option. No papers, no tests, no tables where I'd have to memorize protons and neutrons and combine elements in their proper formulas. What could possibly be better for a high school senior? It seemed like a sure thing. And when I signed up for it, I thought I would just be able to slip through most every class, which, considering my late night peanut eating, was fairly important at the time. On the first day of class, I was one of the last to arrive, coming in just a few seconds before the bell rang, and I took a seat in the back of the room. Miss Garber had her back turned to the class, and she was busy writing her name in big cursive letters, as if we did not know who she was. Everyone knew her. It was impossible not to. She was big, at least 6 feet 2, with flaming red hair and pale skin that showed her freckles well into her 40s. She was also overweight. I'd say honestly, she pushed 250 and she had fondness for wearing flower patterned muumuus. She had thick, dark, horn rimmed glasses and she greeted everyone with hello, sort of singing the last syllables. Miss Garber was one of a kind, that's for sure, and she was single, which made it even worse. A guy, no matter how old, could not help but feel sorry for a girl like her. Beneath her name, she wrote the goals she wanted to accomplish that year. Self confidence was number one, followed by self awareness, and third, self fulfillment. Miss Garber was big into the self stuff, which put her really ahead of the curve as far as psychotherapy is concerned, though she probably did not realize it at the time. Miss Garber was a pioneer in that field. Maybe it had something to do with the way she looked. Maybe she was just trying to feel better about herself. But I digress. It was not until the class started that I noticed something unusual. Though Beaufort High School was not large, I knew for a fact that it was pretty much split 50-50 between males and females, which was why I was surprised when I saw that this class was at least 90% female. There was only one other male in the class, which to my thinking was a good thing, and for a moment I felt flushed with a look out the world, here I come kind of feeling. Girls, girls, girls. I could not help but think girls, and no taste in sight. Okay, so I was not the most forward thinking guy on the block. So Miss Garber brings up the Christmas play and tells everyone that Jamie Sullivan is going to be the angel that year. Miss Garber started clapping right away. She was a member of the church. And there were a lot of people who thought she was gunning for Hugbert in a romantic sort of way. The first time I heard it, I remember thinking that it was a good thing that they were too old to have children. If they ever did get together, imagine translucent with freckles. The very thought gave everyone shudders. But of course, no one ever said anything about it, at least within hearing distance of Miss Garber and Hugbert. Gossip is one thing, hurtful gossip is completely another. And even in high school, we were not that mean. Miss Garber kept on clapping, all alone for a while, until all of us finally joined in, because it was obvious that was what she wanted. Stand up, Jamie, she said. So Jamie stood up and turned around, and Miss Garber started clapping even faster, as if she were standing in the presence of a bona fide movie star. Now, Jamie Sullivan was a nice girl. She really was. Beaufort was small enough that it had only one elementary school, so we had been in the same classes our entire lives. And I would be lying if I said I never talked to her. Once in second grade, she would sat in the seat right next to me for the whole year, and we had even had few conversations. But it did not mean that I spent a lot of time hanging out with her in my spare time, even back then. Who I saw in school was one of the things. Who I saw after school was something completely different, and Jamie had never been on my social calendar. It's not that Jamie was unattractive, don't get me wrong. She was not hideous or anything like that. Fortunately, she had taken after her mother, who, based on the pictures I had seen, was not half bad, especially considering who she ended up marrying. But Jamie was not exactly what I considered attractive either. Despite the fact that she was thin, with honey blonde hair and soft blue eyes. Most of the time, she looked sort of plain, and that was when you noticed her at all. Jamie did not care much about outward appearances because she was always looking for things like inner beauty, and I suppose that's part of the reason she looked the way she did. For as long as I had known her, and this was going way back, remember she had always worn her hair in a tight bun, almost like a spinster, without a stitch of makeup on her face. Coupled with her usual brown cardigan and plaid skirt, she always looked as though she were on her way to interview for a job at the library. We used to think it was just a phrase and that she would eventually grow out of it, but she never had. Even through our first 3 years of high school, she had not changed at all. The only thing that had changed was the size of her clothes. But it was not just the way Jamie looked that made her different, it was also the way she acted. Jamie did not spend any time hanging out at Cecil's diner or going to slumbers parties with other girls, and I knew for a fact that she would never had a boyfriend in her entire life. Old Hugbert would probably have had a heart attack if she had. But even if by some odd turn of events Hugbert had allowed it, it still would not have mattered. Jamie carried her Bible wherever she went, and if her looks and Hugbert did not keep the boys away, the Bible sure as heck did. Now I liked the Bible as much as the next teenage boy, but Jamie seemed to enjoy it in a way that was completely foreign to me. Not only did she go to vacation Bible school every August, but she would read the Bible during lunch break at school. In my mind, that just was not normal, even if she was the minister's daughter. No, no matter how you sliced it, reading Paul's letter to the Ephesians was not nearly as much fun as for flirting, if you know what I mean. But Jamie did not stop there. Because of all her Bible reading, or maybe because of Hugbert's influence, Jamie believed it was important to help others. And helping others is exactly what she did. I knew she volunteered at the orphanage in Moorhead City. But for her, that simply was not enough. She was always in charge of one fundraiser or another, helping everyone from the Boy Scouts to the Indian princesses. And I know that when she was 14, she spent part of her summer painting the outside of an elderly neighbor's house. Jamie was the kind of girl who would pull weeds in someone's garden without being asked or stop traffic to help little kids cross the road. She would save her allowance to buy a new basketball for orphans, or she would turn around and drop the money into the church basket on Sunday. She was, in other words, the kind of girl who made the rest of us look bad. And whenever she glanced my way, I could not help but feel guilty, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Nor did Jamie limit her good deeds to people. If she ever come across a wounded animal, for instance, she would try to help it too. Opossums, squirrels, dogs, cats, frogs, it didn't matter to her. Dr. Rawlings, the vet, knew her by sight, and he would shake his head whenever he saw her walking up to the door, carrying a card box with yet another creature inside. He would take off his eyeglasses and wipe them with his handkerchief while Jamie explained how she had found the poor creature And what happened to it? He was hit by a car, Dr. Rawlings. I think it was in the Lord's plan to have me find him and try save him. You will help me, won't you? With Jamie, everything was in the Lord's plan. That was another thing. She always mentioned the Lord's plan whenever you talked to her, no matter what the subject. The baseball games rained out. Must be the Lord's plan to prevent something worse from happening. A surprise trigonometry quiz that everyone in class fails. Must be in the Lord's plan to give us challenges. Anyway, you get the picture. Then, of course, there was the whole Hugbert situation, and this did not help her at all. Being the minister's daughter could not have been easy, but she made it seem as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and that she was lucky to have been blessed in that way. That's how she used to say it too. I have been so blessed to have a father like mine. Whenever she said it, all we could do was shake our heads and wonder what planet she actually came from. Despite all these other strikes, though, the one thing that really drove me crazy about her was the fact that she was always so damn cheerful, no matter what was happening around her. I swear that girl never said a bad thing about anything or anyone, even to those of us who were not that nice to her. She would hum to herself as she walked down the street. She would have waved to strangers driving by their cars. Sometimes ladies would come running out of their house if they saw her walking by, offering her pumpkin bread if they had been baking all day, or lemonade if the sun was high in the sky. It seemed as if every adult in town adored her. She was such a nice young lady. They would say whenever Jamie's name came up, the world would be a better place if there were more people like her. But my friends and I did not quite see it that way. In our minds, one Jamie Sullivan was plenty. I was thinking about all this while Jamie stood in front of us on the first day of drama class, and I admit that I was not much interested in seeing her. But strangely, when Jamie turned to face us, I kind of got a shock, like I was sitting on a loose wire or something. She wore a plaid skirt with a white blouse under the same brown cardigan sweater. I've seen her a million times, but there were two new bumps on her chest that the sweater could not hide it. That I swore I hadn't been there just 3 months earlier. She had never worn makeup and she still did not, but she had a tan, probably from Bible school, and for the first time she looked well, almost pretty. Of course, I dismissed that thought right away, but as she looked around the room, she stopped and smiled right at me, obviously glad to see that I was in the class. It was not until later that I learned the reason why. Chapter 2 Chapter 2 After high school, I planned to go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. My father wanted me to go to Harvard or Princeton, like some of the sons of other congressmen did. But with my grades, it was not possible. Not that I was a bad student. I just didn't focus on my studies, and my grades weren't exactly up to snuff for the Ivy Leagues. By my senior year, it was pretty much touch and go whether I had even get accepted at UNC, and this was my father's alma mater, a place where he could pull some strings. During one of his few weekends, my father came up with plan to put me over the top. I had just finished my first week of school and we were sitting down for dinner. He was home for 3 days on account of Labor Day weekend. I think you should run for student body president, he said. You will be graduating in June and I think it would look good on your record. Your mother thinks so, too, by the way. My mother nodded as she chewed a mouthful of peas. She didn't speak much when my father had the floor, though she winked at me. Sometimes I think my mother liked to see me scream, even though she was sweet. I do not think I would have chance at winning, I said. Though I was probably the richest kid in school, I was by no means the popular. That honor belonged to Eric Hunter, my best friend. He could throw a baseball at almost 90 miles an hour and he would lead the football team back to back state titles as the star quarterback. He was a stud. Even his name sounded cool. Of course you can win, my father said quickly. We Carters always win. That's another one of the reasons I did not like spending time with my father. During those few times he was home, I think he waited to mold me into a miniature version of himself. Since I had grown up pretty much without him, I'd come to resent having him around. This was the first conversation we had in weeks. He rarely talked to me on the phone. But what if I don't want to? My father put down his fork, a bite of his pork chop still on the tines. He looked at me crossly, giving me the once over. He was wearing a suit even though it was over 80 degrees in the house, and it made him even more intimidating. My father always wore a suit, by the way. I think, he said slowly, that it would be a good idea. I knew that when he talked that way, the issue was settled. That's the way it was in my family. My father's word was law. But the fact was, even after I agreed, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to waste my afternoons meeting with teachers after school. Every week for the rest of the year, dreaming of themes for school dances or trying to decide what colors the streamers should be. That's really all the class presidents did, at least back when I was in high school. It wasn't like students had the power to actually decide anything meaningful. But then again, I knew my father had a point. If I wanted to go to UNC, I had to do something. I didn't play football or basketball. I didn't play an instrument. I wasn't in the chess club or the bowling club or anything else. I didn't excel in the classroom. Hell, I didn't excel at much of anything. Growing despondent, I started listing the things I actually could do. But to be honest, there really wasn't that much. I could tie 8 different types of sailing knots. I could walk barefoot across hot asphalt farther than anyone I knew. I could balance a pencil vertically on my finger for 30 seconds. But I didn't think that any of those things would really stand out on a college application. So there I was, lying in bed all night, slowly coming to the sinking realization that I was a loser. Thanks, Dad. The next morning, I went to the principal's office and added my name to the list of candidates. There were 2 other people running, Joan Foreman and Maggie Brown. Now, Joan didn't stand a chance. I knew that right off. He was the kind of guy who would pick lint off your clothes while he talked to you. But he was a good student. He sat in the front row and raised his hand every time the teacher asked a question. If he was called to give the answer, he would most always give the right one, and he would turn his head from side to side with a smug look on his face, as if proving how superior his intellect was when compared with those of other peons in the room. Eric and I used to shoot spitballs at him when the teacher's back was turned. Maggie Brown was another matter. She was a good student as well. She had served on the student council for the first 3 years and had been the junior class president the year before. The only real strike against her was the fact that she wasn't very attractive, and she would put on 20 pounds that summer. I knew that not a single guy would vote for her. After seeing the competition, I figured that I might have a chance after all. My entire future was on the line here. So, I formulated my strategy. Eric was the first to agree. Sure, I'll get all the guys on the team to vote for you. No problem, if that's what you really want. How about their girlfriends too? I asked. That was pretty much my entire campaign. Of course, I went to the debates like I was supposed to, and I passed out those dorky "what I'll do if I'm elected president" flyers. But in the end, it was Eric Hunter who probably got me where I needed to be. Beaufort High School had only about 400 students, so getting the athletic vote was critical, and most of the jocks did not give a hoot when they voted for anyway. In the end, it worked out just the way I planned. I was voted student body president with a fairly large majority of the vote. I had no idea what trouble it would eventually lead me to. When I was a junior, I went steady with a girl named Angela Clark. She was my first real girlfriend, though it lasted for only a few months. Just before school let out for the summer, she dumped me for a guy named Liu, who was 20 years old and worked as a mechanic in his father's garage. His primary attribute, as far as I could tell, was that he had a really nice car. He always wore a white t-shirt with a pack of camels folded into the sleeve, and he would lean against the hood of his Thunderbird, looking back and forth, saying things like "Hey baby" whenever a girl walked by. He was a real winner, if you know what I mean. Well, anyway, the homecoming dance was coming up, and because of the whole Angela situation, I still didn't have a date. Everyone on the student council had to attend. It was mandatory. I had to help decorate the gym and clean up the next day, and besides, it was usually a pretty good time. I called a couple of girls I knew, but they already had dates. So I called a few more, they had dates too. By the final week, the pickings were getting pretty slim. The pool was down to the kinds of girls who had thick glasses and talked with lisps. Beaufort was never exactly a hotbed for beauties anyway. But then again, I had to find somebody. I didn't want to go to the dance without a date. What would that look like? I'd be the only student body president ever to attend the homecoming dance alone. I would end up being the guy scooping ponds all night long or mopping up the barf in the bathroom. That's what people without dates usually did. Growing sort of panicky, I pulled out the yearbook from the year before and started flipping through the pages one by one, looking for anyone who might not have a date. First, I looked through the pages with seniors. Though a lot of them were off at college, a few of them were still around town. Even though I didn't think I had much of a chance with them, I called anyway. And surely enough, I was proven right. I couldn't find anyone, at least not anyone who would go with me. I was getting pretty good at handling rejection. I'll tell you, though that's not the sort of thing you brag about to your grandkids, my mom knew what I was going through. And she finally came into my room and sat on the bed beside me. She finally said, "If you can't get a date, I'll be happy to go with you," she said. "Thanks, Mom," I said dejectedly. When she left the room, I felt even worse than I had before. Even my mom didn't think I could find somebody. And if I showed up with her, if I lived 100 years, I'd never live that down. There was another guy in my boat, by the way, Kerry Denison. He had been elected treasurer, and he still didn't have a date either. Kerry was the kind of guy no one wanted to spend time with at all. And the only reason he had been elected was because he would run unopposed. Even then, I think the vote was fairly close. He played the tuba in the marching band, and his body looked all out of proportion, as if he had stopped growing halfway through puberty. He had a great big stomach and gangly arms and legs, like the Who's in Whoville, if you know what I mean. He also had a high-pitched way of talking. It's what made him such a good tuba player, I reckon, and he never stopped asking questions. "Where did you go last weekend? Was it fun? Did you see any girls?" He wouldn't even wait for an answer, and he would move around constantly as he asked, so you had to keep turning your head to keep him in sight. I swear, he was probably the most annoying person I had ever met. If I didn't get a date, he would stand off on one side with me all night long, firing questions like some deranged prosecutor. So there I was, flipping through the pages in the junior class section. When I saw Jamie Sullivan's picture, I paused just for a second, then turned the page, cursing myself for even thinking about it. I spent the next hour searching for anyone halfway decent looking, but I slowly came to the realization that there wasn't anyone left. In time, I finally turned back to her picture and looked again. She was not bad looking, I told myself, and she is really sweet. She would probably say yes, I thought. I closed the yearbook. Jamie Sullivan? Hugbert's daughter? No way. Absolutely not. My friends would roast me alive. But compared with dating your mother, or cleaning up puke, or even, God forbid, Kerry Denison, I spent the rest of the evening debating the pros and cons of my dilemma. Believe me, I went back and forth for a while, but in the end, the choice was obvious, even to me. I had to ask Jamie to the dance, and I paced around the room, thinking of the best way to ask her. I was then that I realized something terrible, something absolutely frightening. Kerry Denison, I suddenly realized, was probably doing the exact same thing I was doing right now. He was probably looking through the yearbook too, He was weird, but he wasn't the kind of guy who liked cleaning up puke either. And if you had seen his mother, you would know that his choice was even worse than mine. What if he asked Jamie first? Jamie would not say no to him. And realistically, she was the only option he had. No one besides her would be caught dead with him. Jamie helped everyone. She was one of those equal opportunity friends. She would probably listen to the Carey's squeaky voice, see the goodness radiating from his heart, and accept right off the bat. So, there I was, sitting in my room, frantic with the possibility that Jamie might not go to the dance with me. I barely slept that night, I tell you, which was just about the strangest thing I had ever experienced. I don't think anyone ever fretted about asking Jamie out before. I planned to ask her first thing in the morning, while I still had my courage, but Jamie was not in school. I assumed she was working with the orphans over in Moorhead City, the way she did every month. A few of us had tried to get out of school using that excuse too, but Jamie was the only one who ever got away with it. The principal knew she was reading to them or doing crafts or just sitting around playing games with them. She wasn't sneaking out to the beach or hanging out at Cecil's diner or something. That concept was absolutely ludicrous. Got a date yet? Eric asked me in between classes. He knew very well that I didn't, but even though he was my best friend, he liked to stick it to me once in a while. Not it, I said, but I'm working on it. Down the hall, Carey Denison was reaching into his locker. I swear he shot me a beady glare when he thought I wasn't looking. That's the kind of day it was. The minutes ticked by slowly during my final class. The way I figured it, if Carey and I got out at the same time, I'd be able to get her house first. What with those gawky legs and all, I started to psych myself up, and when the bell rang, I took off from school running at full clip. I was flying for about 100 yards or so, and then I started to get kind of tired, and then a cramp set in. Pretty soon, all I could do was walk, but that cramp really started to get to me, and I had to bend over and hold my side while I kept moving. As I made my way down the streets of Beaufort, I looked like a wheezing version of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Behind me, I thought I heard Carey's high-pitched laughter. I turned around, digging my fingers into my gut to stifle the pain, but I couldn't see him. Maybe he was cutting through someone's backyard. He was a sneaky bastard, that guy. You couldn't trust him even for a minute. I started to stumble along even faster, and pretty soon reached Jamie's street. By then I was sweating all over. My shirt was soaked right through, and I was still wheezing something fierce. Well, I reached her front door, took a second to catch my breath, and finally knocked. Despite my fevered rush to her house, my pessimistic side assumed that Carey would be the one who opened the door for me. I imagined him smiling at me with a victorious look in his eye, one that essentially meant, "Sorry, partner, you are too late." But it wasn't Carey who answered. It was Jamie, and for the first time in my life, I saw what she would look like if she were an ordinary person. She was wearing jeans and a red blouse, and though her hair was still pulled up into a bun, she looked more casual than she usually did. I realized she could actually be cute if she gave herself the opportunity. Landon, she said as she held open the door. This is a surprise. Jamie was always glad to see everyone, including me. I think my appearance startled her. You look like you have been exercising, she said. Not really, I lied, wiping my brow. Luckily, the cramp was fading fast. You have sweat clean through your shirt. Oh, that? I looked at my shirt. That's nothing. I just sweat a lot sometimes. Maybe you should have it checked by a doctor. I'll be okay, I'm sure. I'll say a prayer for you anyway, she offered as she smiled. Jamie was always praying for someone. I might as well join the club. Thanks, I said. She looked down and sort of shuffled her feet for a moment. Well, I would invite you in, but my father is not home, and he does not allow boys in the house while he is not around. Oh, I said dejectedly. That's okay. We can talk out here, I guess. If I had my way, I would have done this inside. Would you like some lemonade while we sit? She asked. I just made some. I'd love some, I said. I'll be right back. She walked back into the house, but she left the door open and I took a quick glance around. The house, I noticed, was small but tidy, with a piano against one wall and a sofa against the other. A small fan sat oscillating in the corner. On the coffee table, there were books with names like Listening to Jesus and Faith is the Answer. Her Bible was there too, and it was open to the chapter on Luke. A moment later, Jamie returned with lemonade, and we took a seat in two chairs near the corner of the porch. I knew she and her father sat in the evenings because I passed by their house now and then. As soon as we were seated, I saw Mrs. Hastings, her neighbor across the street, wave to us. Jamie waved back, while I sort of scooted my chair so that Mrs. Hastings could not see my face. Even though I was going to ask Jamie to the dance, I didn't want anyone, even Mrs. Hastings, to see me there on the off chance that she would already accepted Carrie's offer. It was one thing to actually go with Jamie, it was another thing to be rejected by her in favor of a guy like Carrie. What are you doing? Jamie asked me. You are moving your chair into the sun. I like the sun, I said. She was right though. Almost immediately I could feel the rays burning through my shirt and making me sweat again. If that's what you want, she said, smiling. So, what did you want to talk to me about? Jamie reached up and started to adjust her hair. By my reckoning, it hadn't moved at all. I took a deep breath, trying to gather myself, but I couldn't force myself to come out with it just yet. So, I said instead, you were at the orphanage today? Jamie looked at me curiously. No, my father and I were at the doctor's office. Is he okay? She smiled. Healthy as can be. I nodded and glanced across the street. Mrs. Hastings had gone back inside, and I couldn't see anyone else in the vicinity. The coast was finally clear, but I still wasn't ready. Sure is a beautiful day, I said, stalling. Yes, it is. Warm too. That's because you are in the sun. I looked around, feeling the pressure building. Why, I'll bet there is not a single cloud in the whole sky. This time, Jamie didn't respond, and we sat in silence for a few moments. Landon, she finally said, you didn't come here to talk about the weather, did you? Not really. Then why are you here? The moment of truth had arrived, and I cleared my throat. Well, I wanted to know if you were going to the homecoming dance. Oh, she said. Her tone made it seem as if she were unaware that such a thing existed. I fidgeted in my seat and waited for her answer. I really hadn't planned on going, she finally said. But if someone asked you to go, you might? It took a moment for her to answer. I'm not sure, she said, thinking carefully. I suppose might go if I got the chance, but I have never been to a homecoming dance before. They are fun, I said quickly. Not too much fun, but fun, especially when compared to my other options, I didn't add. She smiled at my turn of face. I'd have to talk to my father, of course, but if he said it was okay, then I guess I could. In the tree beside the porch, a bird started to chirp noisily as if he knew I wasn't supposed to be here. I concentrated on the sound, trying to calm my nerves. Just 2 days ago, I couldn't have imagined myself even thinking about it. But suddenly, there I was, listening to myself as I spoke the magic words. Well, would you like to go to the dance with me? I could tell she was surprised. I think she believed that the little lead up to the question probably had to do with someone else asking her. Sometimes teenagers sent their friends out to scout the terrain, so to speak, so as not to face the possible rejection. Even though Jamie wasn't much like other teenagers, I'm sure she was familiar with the concept, at least in theory. Instead of answering right away, though Jamie glanced away for a long moment, I got a sinking feeling in my stomach because I assumed she was going to say no. Visions of my mother, puke, and Carrie flooded through my mind, and all of a sudden I regretted the way I had behaved toward her all these years. I kept remembering all the times I had teased her or called her father a fornicator or simply made fun of her behind her back. Just when I was feeling awful about the whole thing and imagining how I would ever be able to avoid Carrie for 5 hours, she turned and faced me again. She had a slight smile on her face. I would love to, she finally said, on one condition. I steadied myself, hoping it wasn't something too awful. Yes. You have to promise that you won't fall in love with me. I knew she was kidding by the way she laughed, and I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Sometimes I had to admit, Jamie had a pretty good sense of humor. I smiled and gave her my word. Chapter 3. As a general rule, Southern Baptists don't dance. In Beaufort, however, it wasn't a rule that was ever strictly enforced. The minister before Hugbert, don't ask me what his name was, took a sort of lax view about school dances as long as they were chaperoned, and because of that, they had become a tradition of sorts. By the time Hegbert came along, it was too late to change things. Jamie was pretty much the only one who had never been to a school dance, and frankly, I didn't know whether she even knew how to dance at all. I admit that I also had some concerns about what she would wear, though it wasn't something I would tell her. When Jamie went to the church socials, which were encouraged by Hugbert, she usually wore an old sweater and one of the plaid skirts we saw in school every day. But the homecoming dance was supposed to be special. Most of the girls bought new dresses and the boys wore suits. And this year, we were bringing in a photographer to take our pictures. I knew Jamie wasn't going to buy a new dress because she wasn't exactly well off. Ministering wasn't a profession where people made a lot of money. But of course, ministers weren't in it for monetary gain, they were in it for the long haul, if you know what I mean. But I didn't want her to wear the same things she wore to school every day either. Not so much for me. I'm not that cold hearted. But because of what others might say. I didn't want people to make fun of her or anything. The good news, if there was any, was that Eric didn't read me too bad about the whole Jimmy situation because he was too busy thinking about his own date. He was taking Margaret, the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but she was nice in her own way. By nice, of course, I'm talking about her legs. Eric offered to double date with me, but I turned him down because I did not want to take any chances with Eric teasing Jamie or anything like that. He was a good guy, but he could be kind of heartless sometimes, especially when he had a few sorts of bourbon in him. The day of dance was actually quite busy for me. I spent most of the afternoon helping to decorate the gym, and I had to get to Jamie's about half hour early because her father wanted to talk to me. Though I did not know why, Jamie had sprung that one on me just the day before, and I cannot say I was exactly thrilled by the prospect of it. I figured he was going to talk about temptation and the evil paths it could lead to us. If he brought up fornication, though I knew I would die right there on the spot, I said small prayers all day long in the hope of avoiding this conversation. But I was not sure if God would put my prayers on the front burner. If you know what I mean, because of the way I had behaved in the past, I was pretty nervous just thinking about it. After I showered, I put on my best suit, swung by the florist to pick up Jamie's corsage, then drove her to house. My mom had let me borrow the car, and I parked it on the street directly in front of Jamie's house. We had not turned the clocks back yet, so it was still light out when I got there, and I strolled up the cracked walkway to her door, knocked and waited for a moment, then knocked again. From behind the door, I heard Hugbert say, "I'll be right there." But he wasn't exactly racing to the door. I must have stood there for 2 minutes or so, looking at the door, the moldings, the little cracks in the windows, ills off to the slide where the chairs that Jamie and I had sat in just a few days back. The one I sat in was still turned in the opposite direction. I guess they hadn't sat there in the last couple of days. Finally, The door creaked open. The light coming from the lamp inside shadowed Hugbert's face slightly and sort of reflected through his hair. He was old, like I said, 72 years by my reckoning. I was the first time I had ever seen him this close, and I could see all the wrinkles on his face. His skin really was translucent, even more so than I had imagined. "Hello, Reverend," I said, swallowing my trepidation. "I'm here to take Jamie to the homecoming dance." "Of course you are," he said. "But first, I wanted to talk with you." "Yes, sir, that's why I came early." "Come on in." In church, Hugbert was a fairly snappy dresser, but right now he looked like a farmer, dressed in overalls and a t-shirt. He motioned for me to sit on the wooden chair he had brought in from the kitchen. "I'm sorry it took a little while to open the door. I was working on tomorrow's sermon," he said. I sat down. "That's okay, sir. I don't know why, but you just had to call him sir." He sort of projected that image. "All right, then. So tell me about yourself." I thought it was a fairly ridiculous question. With him having such a long history with my family and all, he was also the one who had baptized me, by the way, and he had seen me in church every Sunday since I had been a baby. "Well, sir," I began, not really knowing what to say. "I am the student body president. I don't know whether Jamie mentioned that to you." He nodded. "She did. Go on." "And, well, I hope to go to the University of North Carolina next fall. I have already received the application." He nodded again. "Anything else?" I had to admit, I was running out of the things after that. Part of me wanted to pick up the pencil off the end table and start balancing it, giving him the whole 30 seconds worth. But he was not the kind of guy who would appreciate it. "I guess not, sir. Do you mind if I ask you a question?" "No, sir." He sort of stared at me for a long time, as if thinking about it. "Why did you ask my daughter to the dance?" he finally said. I was surprised, and I know that my expression showed it. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "You are not planning to do anything to embarrass her, are you?" "No, sir," I said quickly, shocked by the accusation. "Not at all. I needed someone to go with, and I asked her. It's as simple as that." "You don't have any pranks planned?" "No, sir. I wouldn't do that to her." This went on for a few more minutes. He's grilling me about my true intentions. But luckily Jamie stepped out of the back room, and her father and I both turned our heads at the same moment. Hugbert finally stopped talking, and I breathed a sigh of relief. She had put on a nice blue skirt and a white blouse I had never seen before. Fortunately, she had left her sweater in the closet. It wasn't too bad, I had to admit, though I knew she would still be undressed compared with others at the dance. As always, her hair was pulled up in a bun. Personally, I think it would have looked better if she had kept it down, but that was the last thing I wanted to say. Jamie looked Jamie looked exactly like she usually did, but at least she wasn't planning on bringing her Bible. That would have just been too much to live down. "You are not giving Landon a hard time, are you?" she said cheerfully to her father. "We were just visiting." I said quickly before he had a chance to respond. For some reason, I didn't think he would tell Jamie about the kind of person he thought I was, and I didn't think that now would be a good time. Well, we should probably go, she said after a moment. I think she sensed the tension in the room. She walked over to her father and kissed him on the cheek. Don't stay up too late working on the sermon, okay? I won't, he said softly. Even with me in the room, I could tell he really loved her and wasn't afraid to show it. It was how he felt about me that was the problem. We said goodbye, and on our way to the car, I handed Jamie her corsage and told her I'd show her how to put it once we got in the car. I opened her door for her and walked around the other side, then got in as well. In that short period of time, Jamie had already pinned on the flower. I'm not exactly a dimwit, you know. I do know how to pin a corsage. I started the car, headed towards the high school, with the conversation I had just had with Hegbert running through my mind. My father doesn't like you very much, she said, as if knowing what I was thinking. I nodded without saying anything. He thinks you are irresponsible. I nodded again. He doesn't like your father much either. I nodded once more. Or your family. I get the picture. But do you know what I think? She asked suddenly. Not really. By then I was pretty depressed. I think that all this was in the Lord's plan somehow. What do you think the message is? Here we go. I thought to myself. I doubt if the evening could have been much worse. If you want to know the truth, most of my friends kept their distance. And Jamie didn't have many friends to begin with, so we spent most of our time alone. Even worse, it turned out that my presence was not even required anymore. They had changed the rule owing to the fact that Carrie couldn't get a date, and that left me feeling pretty miserable about the whole thing as soon as I found out about it. But because of what her father had said to me, I couldn't exactly take her home early now, could I? And more than that, she was really having a good time. Even I could see that. She loved the decorations I had helped put up. She loved the music. She loved everything about the dance. She kept telling me how wonderful everything was. And she asked me whether I might help her decorate the church someday. For one of their socials, I sort of mumbled that she could call me, and even though I said it without a trace of energy, Jamie thanked me for being so considerate. To be honest, I was depressed for at least the first hour, though she didn't seem to notice. Jamie had to be home by 11 o'clock, an hour before the dance ended, which made it somewhat easier for me to handle. Once the music started, we hit the floor, and it turned out that she was a pretty good dancer, considering it was her first time and all. She followed my lead pretty well through about a dozen songs, and after that we headed to the tables and had what resembled an ordinary conversation. Sure, she threw in words like faith and joy and even salvation, and she talked about helping the orphans and scooping critters off the highway, but she was just so damn happy. It was hard to stay down for long. So things were not too terrible at first. and really no worse than I had expected. It was not until Liu and Angela showed up that everything really went sour. They showed up a few minutes after we arrived. He was wearing that stupid t-shirt, camels in his sleeve, and a glob of hair gel on his head. Angela hung all over him right from the beginning of the dance, and it did not take a genius to realize she had a few drinks before she got there. Her dress was really flashy. Her mother worked in a salon and was up on all the latest fashions. And I noticed she had picked up that ladylike habit called chewing gum. She really worked that gum. It almost looked like a cow working her curd. Well, good old Liu spiked the punch ball, and a few more people started getting tipsy. By the time the teachers found out, most of the punch was already gone and people were getting that glassy look in their eyes. When I saw Angela gobble up her second glass of punch, I knew I should keep my eye on her. Even though she had dumped me, I did not want anything bad to happen to her. She was the first girl I had ever French kissed, and even though our teeth clanked together so hard for the first time, we tried it that I saw stars and had to take aspirin when I got home. I still had feelings for her. So, there I was, sitting with Jamie, barely listening as she described the wonders of Bible school, watching Angela out of the corner of my eye, when Liu spotted me looking at her. In one frenzied notion, he grabbed Angela around the waist and dragged her over to the table, giving me one of those looks, the one that means business. You know the one I am talking about. Are you staring at my girl? He asked, already tensing up. No. Yeah, he was, Angela said, kind of slurring out of the words. He was staring right at me. This is my old boyfriend, the one I told you about. His eyes turned into little slits, just like hugbirds were prone to do. I guess I have this effect on lots of people. So, you are the one, he said, sneering. Now, I'm not much of a fighter. The only real fight I was ever in was in third grade, and I pretty much lost that one. When I started to cry, even before the guy punched me, usually I did not have much trouble staying away from things like this because of my passive nature, and besides, no one ever messed with me when Eric was around. But Eric was off with Margaret somewhere, probably behind bleachers. I was not staring, I said finally, and I don't know what she told you, but I doubt if it was true. His eyes narrowed. Are you calling Angela a liar? He sneered. Oops. I think he would have hit me right there, but Jamie suddenly worked her way into the situation. Don't I know you? She said cheerfully, looking right at him. Sometimes Jamie seemed oblivious of situations that were happening right in front of her. Wait, yes, I do. You work in the garage downtown. Your father's name is Joe, and your grandma lives out on Foster Road by the railroad crossing. A look of confusion crossed Liu's face, as though he were trying to put together a puzzle with too many pieces. How do you know all that? What he would do tell you about me, too? No, Jamie said. Don't be silly. She laughed to herself. Only Jamie could find humor at a time like this. I saw your picture in your grandma's house. I was walking by and she needed some help bringing in the groceries. Your picture was on the mantel. Liu was looking at Jamie as though she had cornstalks growing out of her ears. Meanwhile, Jamie was fanning herself with her hand. Well, we were just sitting down to take breather from all that dancing. It sure gets hot out here. Would you like to join us? We've got a couple of chairs. I'd love to hear how your grandma is doing. She sounded so happy about it that Liu did not know what to do. Unlike those of us who were used to this sort of thing, he had never come across someone like Jamie before. He stood there for a moment or two, trying to decide if he should hit the guy with the girl who had helped his grandma. If it sounds confusing to you, imagine what it was doing to Liu's petroleum damaged brain. He finally skulked off without responding, taking Angela with him. Angela had probably forgotten how the whole thing started anyway, owing to the amount she had to drink. Jamie and I watched him go when he was a safe distance away, exhaled. I had not even realized I had been holding my breath. Thanks, I said, mumbled sleepishly, realizing that Jamie was the one who had saved me from the grave bodily harm. Jamie looked at me strangely. For what? She asked. And when I did not exactly spell it out for her, she went right back into her story about Bible school as if nothing had happened at all. But this time, I found myself actually listening to her. At least with one of my ears. It was the least I could do. It turns out that it was not the last we saw of either Liu or Angela that evening. The two glasses of punch had really done Angela in, and she threw up all over the ladies' restroom. Liu, being the classy guy he was, left when he heard her retching, sort of slinking out the way he came in, and that was the last I saw of him. Jamie, as fate would have it, was the one who found Angela in the bathroom, and it was obvious that Angela was not doing too well. The only option was to clean her up and take her home before the teachers found out about it. Getting drunk was a big deal back then, and she would be looking at suspension, maybe even expulsion, if she got caught. Jamie, bless her heart, did not want that to happen any more than I did. Though I would have thought otherwise if you had asked me beforehand, owing to the fact that Angela was a minor and in violation of the law. She had also broken another one of Hugbert's rules for proper behavior. Hugbert frowned on law breaking and drinking, and though it did not get him going like fornication, we all knew he was deadly serious. And we assumed Jamie felt the same way, and maybe she did, but her helper instinct must have taken over. She probably took one look at Angela and thought, wounded critter, or something like that, and took immediate charge of the situation. I went off and located Eric behind the bleachers, and he agreed to stand guard at the bathroom door. While Jamie and I went in to tidy it up, Angela had done a marvelous job, I tell you. The puke was everywhere except the toilet. The walls, the floor, the sinks, even on the ceiling. Though don't ask me how she did that. So there I was, perched on all floors, cleaning up puke at the homecoming dance in my best blue suit. which was exactly what I had wanted to avoid in the first place. And Jamie, my dad, was on all fours too, doing exactly the same thing. I could practically hear Carrie laughing a squeaky maniacal laugh somewhere in the distance. We ended up sneaking out the back door of the gym, keeping Angela stable by walking on either side of her. She kept asking where Liv was, but Jamie told her not to worry. She had a real soothing way of talking to Angela. Though Angela was so far gone, I doubt if she even knew who was speaking. We loaded Angela into the back seat of my car, where she passed out almost immediately. Although not before, she had vomited once more on the floor of the car. The smell was so awful that we had to roll down the windows to keep from gagging, and the drive to Angela's house seemed extra long. Her mother answered the door, took one look at her daughter, and brought her inside without so much as word of thanks. I think she was embarrassed, and we really did not have much to say to her anyway. The situation pretty much spoke for itself. By the time we dropped her off, it was 10:45, and we drove straight back to Jamie's, and I was really worried when we got there because of the way she looked and smelled. And I said a silent prayer, hoping that Hugbert was not awake. I did not want to have to explain this to him. Oh, he would probably listen to Jamie if she was the one who told him about it. But I had the sinking feeling that he would find a way to blame me anyway. So I walked her to the door and we stood outside under the porch light. Jamie crossed her arms and smiled a little, looking just as if she had come in from an evening stroll where she had contemplated the beauty of the world. Please don't tell your father about this, I said. I won't, she said. She kept on smiling when she finally turned my way. I had a good time tonight. Thank you for taking me to the dance. Here she was, covered in puke, actually thanking me for the evening. Jamie Sullivan could really drive a guy crazy sometimes. Chapter 4. In the 2 weeks of following homecoming dance, my life pretty much returned to normal. My father was back in Washington, D.C., which made things a lot more fun around my house, primarily because I could sneak out the window again and head to the graveyard for my late night forays. I don't know what it was about the graveyard that attracted us so. Maybe it had something to do with the tombstones themselves, because as far as tombstones went, they were actually fairly comfortable to sit on. We usually sat in a small plot where the Preston family had been buried about 100 years ago. There were 8 tombstones there, all arranged in a circle, making it easy to pass the boiled peanuts back and forth between us. One time, my friends and I decided to learn what we could about the Preston family, and we went to the library to find out. If anything had been written about them, I mean, if you are going to sit on someone's tombstone, you might as well know something about them, right? It turns out that there was not much about the family in the historical records, though we did find out one interesting tidbit of information. Henry Preston, the father, was a one-armed lumberjack. Believe it or not, supposedly he could cut down a tree as fast as any two-armed man. Now the vision of a one-armed lumberjack is pretty vivid right off the bat. So we talked about him a lot. We used to wonder what else he could do with only one arm, and we would spend long hours discussing how fast he could pitch a baseball or whether or not he would be able to swim across the intercoastal waterway. Our conversations were not exactly highbrow, I admit, but I enjoyed them nonetheless. Well, Eric and me were out there one Saturday night with a couple of other friends, eating boiled peanuts and talking about Henry Preston when Eric asked me how my date went with Jamie Sullivan. He and I hadn't seen much of each other since the homecoming dance because the football season was already in the playoffs and Eric had been out of town the past few weekends with the team. It was okay, I said, shrugging, doing my best to play it cool. Eric playfully elbowed me in the ribs and I grunted. He outweighed me by at least 30 pounds. Did you kiss her goodnight? No. He took a long drink from his can of Budweiser as I answered. I don't know how he did it, but Eric never had trouble buying beer, which was strange, being that everyone in town knew how old he was. He wiped his lips with the back of his hand, tossing me a sidelong glance. I would have thought that after she helped you clean the bathroom, you would have at least kissed her goodnight. Well, I didn't. Did you even try? No. Why not? She's not that kind of girl, I said. And even though we all knew it was true, it still sounded like I was defending her. Eric latched on to that like a leech. I think you like her, he said. You are full of crap, I answered, and he slapped my back hard enough to force the breath right out of me. Hanging out with Eric usually meant that I'd have a few bruises the following day. Yeah, I might be full of crap, he said, winking at me. But you are the one who is smitten with Jamie Sullivan. I knew we were treading on a dangerous ground. I was just using her to impress Margaret, I said. And with all the love notes she has been sending me lately, I reckon it must have worked. Eric laughed aloud, slapping me on the back again. You and Margaret now? That's funny. I knew I had just dodged a major bullet, and I breathed a sigh of relief as the conversation spun off in a new direction. I joined in now and then, but I was not really listening to what they were saying. Instead, I kept hearing the little voice inside me that made me wonder about what Eric had said. The thing was, Jamie was probably the best date I could have had that night, especially considering how the evening turned out. Not many dates, heck, not many people, period, would have done what she did. At the same time, her being a good date did not mean I liked her. I had not talked to her at all since the dance, except when I saw her in drama class, and even then it was only a few words here and there. If I liked her at all, I told myself I would have wanted to talk to her. If I liked her, I would have offered to walk her home. If I liked her, I would have wanted to bring her Cecil's diner for a basket of hush puppies and some RC cola. But I did not want to do any of these things. I really did not. In my mind, I had already served my penance. The next day, Sunday, I was in my room working on my application to UNC. In addition to the transcripts from my high school and other personal information, they required 5 essays of the usual type. If you could meet one person in history, who would that person be and why? Name the most significant influence in your life and why you feel that way. What do you look for a role model and why? The essay questions were fairly predictable. Our English teacher had told us what to expect, and I had already worked on couple of variations in class as homework. English was probably my best subject. I had never received anything lower than A since I first started school, and I was glad the emphasis for the application process was on writing. If it had been on math, I might have been in trouble, especially if it included those algebra questions that talked about the two trains leaving an hour apart, traveling in opposite directions at 40 miles an hour, etc. It was not that bad that I was bad in math. I usually pulled up at least a C, but it did not come naturally to me, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I was writing one of my essays when the phone rang. The only phone we had was located in kitchen, and had to run downstairs to grab the receiver. I was breathing so loudly that I could not make out the voice too well, though it sounded like Angela. I immediately smiled to myself, even though she had been sick all over the place and I had to clean it up. She was actually pretty fun to be around most of the time. And her dress really had been something, at least for the first hour. I figured she was probably calling to thank me or even to get together for a barbecue sandwich and hush puppies or something. Landon? Oh hey, I said, playing it cool. What's going on? There was a short pause on the other end. How are you? It was then that I suddenly realized I was not speaking to Angela. Instead, it was Jamie, and I almost dropped the phone. I can't say that I was happy about hearing from her, and for a second I wondered who had given her my phone number before. I realized it was probably in the church records. Landon. I'm fine, I finally blurted out, still in shock. Are you busy? She asked. Sort of. Oh, I see, she said, trailing off. She paused again. Why are you calling me? I asked. It took her a few seconds to get the words out. Well, I just wanted to know if you wouldn't mind coming by a little later this afternoon. Coming by? Yes, to my house. Your house? I didn't even try to disguise the growing surprise in my voice. Jamie ignored it and went on. There is something I want to talk to you about. I wouldn't ask if it was not important. Can't you tell me over the phone? I'd rather not. Well, I'm working on my college application essays all afternoon, I said, trying to get out of it. Oh, well, like I said, it's important, but I suppose I can talk to you Monday at school. With that, I suddenly realized that she was not going to let me off the hook, and that we would end up talking one way or the other. My brain suddenly clicked through the scenarios as I tried to figure out which one I should do. Talk to her where my friends would see us, or talk at her house. Though neither option was particularly good, there was something in the back of my mind, reminding me that she had helped me out when I really needed it. And the least I could do was to listen to what she had to say. I may be irresponsible, but I'm a nice irresponsible, if I do say so myself. Of course, that didn't mean everyone else had to know about it. No, I said. Today is fine. We arranged to meet at 5 o'clock, and the rest of afternoon ticked by slowly, like the drips from Chinese water torture. I left my house 20 minutes early, so I'd have plenty of time to get there. My house was located near the waterfront in the historic part of town, just a few doors down from where Blackbeard used to live, overlooking the intercoastal waterway. Jamie lived on the other side of the town, across the railroad tracks, so it would take me about that long to get there. It was November, and the temperature was finally cooling down. One thing I really liked about Beaufort was the fact that the springs and falls lasted practically forever. It might get hot in the summer or snow once every 6 years, and there might be a cold spell that lasted a week or so in January, but for most part all you needed was a light jacket to make it through the winter. Today was one of those perfect days, mid-70s, without a cloud in the sky. I made it to Jamie's house right on time and knocked on her door. Jamie answered it, and a quick peek inside revealed that Hugbert was not around. It was not quite warm enough for sweet tea or lemonade, and we sat in the chairs on the porch again, without anything to drink. The sun was beginning to lower itself in the sky, and there was not anyone on the street. This time I didn't have to move my chair. I hadn't been moved since the last time I had been there. "Thank you for coming, Landon," she said. "I know you are busy, but I appreciate your taking the time to do this." "So, what's so important?" I said, wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible. Jamie, for the first time since I had known her, actually looked nervous as she sat with me. She kept bringing her hands together and pulling them apart. "I wanted to ask you a favor," she said seriously. "A favor?" She nodded. At first, I thought she was going to ask me to help her decorate the church like she had mentioned at homecoming. Or maybe she needed me to use my mother's car to bring some stuffs to the orphans. Jamie did not have her license, and Hugbert needed their car anyway, being that there was always a funeral or something he had to go to. But it still took a few seconds for her to get the words out. She sighed, her hands coming together again. "I'd like to ask you if you wouldn't mind playing Tom Thornton in school play," she said. Tom Thornton, like I said before, was the man in search of music box for his daughter, the one who meets the angel. Except for the angel, it was far and away the most important role. "Well, I don't know," I said, confused. "I thought Eddie Jones was going to be Tom. That's what Miss Garber told us." Eddie Jones was a lot like Kerry Dennison. By the way, he was really skinny with pimples all over his face, and he usually talked to you with eyes all squenched up. He had a nervous tick, and he could not help but squint his eyes whenever he got nervous, which was practically all the time. He would probably end up spouting his lines like a psychotic blind man if you put him in front of a crowd. To make things worse, he had a stutter too, and it took him a long time to say anything at all. Miss Garber had given him the role because he had been the only one who offered to do it, but even then, it was obvious she did not want him either. Teachers were human too, but she did not have much of an option since no one else had come forward. Miss Garber did not say exactly. What she said was that Eddie could have the role if no one else tried out for it. Can someone else do it instead? But there really was not anyone else, and I knew it. Because of Hogbert's requirement that only seniors perform, the play was in a bind that year. There were about 50 senior boys at the high school, 22 of whom were on the football team, and with the team still in the running for state title, none of them would have the time to go to the rehearsals. Of the 30 or so who were left, more than half were in the band, and they had after-school practice as well. A quick calculation showed that there were maybe a dozen other people who could possibly do it. Now, I did not want to do the play at all, and not only because I had come to realize that drama was just about the most boring class ever invented. The thing was, I had already taken Jamie to homecoming, and with her as the angel, I just couldn't bear the thought that I would have to spend every afternoon with her for the next month or so. Being seen with her once was bad enough, but being seen with her every day, what would my friends say? But I could tell this was really important to her. The simple fact that she had asked me made that clear. Jamie never asked anyone for a favor. I think deep down she suspected that no one would ever do her a favor because of who she was. The very realization made me sad. What about Jeff Bangerot? He might do it, I offered. Jamie shook her head. He can't. His father is sick, and he has to work in the store after school until his father gets back on his feet. What about Darren Woods? He broke his arm last week when he slipped on the boat. His arm is in a sling. Really? I did not know that. I said stalling, but Jamie knew what I was doing. I have been praying about it, Landon, she said simply and sighed for a second time. I would really like this play to be special this year, not for me, but because of my father. I want it to be the best production ever. I know how much it will mean to him to see me be the angel, because this play reminds him of my mother. She paused, collecting her thoughts. It would be terrible if the play was the failure this year, especially since I'm involved. She stopped again before going on, her voice becoming more emotional as she went on. I know Eddie would do the best if he could. I really do. And I'm not embarrassed to do the play with him. I'm really not. Actually, he is a very nice person. But he told me that he is having second thoughts about doing it. Sometimes people at school can be so cruel. And I don't want Eddie to be hurt. But she took a deep breath. But the real reason I'm asking is because of my father. He is such a good man, Landon. If people make fun of his memory of my mother while I'm playing the part, well, that would break my heart. And with Eddie and me, you know what people would say. I nodded, my lips pressed together, knowing that I would have been one of those people she was talking about. In fact, I already was. Jamie and Eddie, The dynamic duo, we called them after Miss Garber had announced that they would be the ones doing the roles. The very fact that it was I who had started it up made me feel terrible, almost sick to my stomach. She straightened up a little in her seat and looked at me sadly, as if she already knew I was going to say no. I guess she did not know how I was feeling. She went on, I know that challenges are always part of the Lord's plan, but I don't want to believe that the Lord is cruel, especially to someone like my father. He devotes his life to God, he gives to the community, and he is already lost his wife and has to raise me on his own. And I love him so much for it. Jamie turned away, but I could see the tears in her eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen her cry. I think part of me wanted to cry too. I'm not asking you to do it for me, she said softly. I'm really not. And if you say no, I will still pray for you. I promise. But if you'd like to do something kind for a wonderful man who means so much to me, will you just think about it? Her eyes looked like those of a cocker spaniel that had just messed on the rock. I looked down at my feet. I don't have to think about it, I finally said. I'll do it. I really did not have a choice, did I? Chapter 5. The next day, I talked to Miss Garber, went through the audition, and got the part. Eddie, by the way, was not upset at all. In fact, I could tell he was actually relieved about the whole thing. When Miss Garber asked him if he'd be willing to let me play the role of Tom Thornton, his face sort of relaxed right there and one of his eyes popped back open. Yes, absolutely, he said, stuttering. I understand. It took him practically 10 seconds to get the words out. For his generosity, however, Miss Garber gave him the role of the bomb, and we knew he would do fairly well in that role. The bomb, you see, was completely mute, but the angel always knew what he was thinking. At one point in the play, she has to tell the mute bomb that God will always watch out for him because God especially cares for the poor and downtrodden. That was one of the tip-offs to the audience that she had been sent from heaven. Like I said earlier, Hugbert wanted it to be a real clear who offered redemption and salvation, and it certainly was not going to be a few trickety ghosts who just popped out of nowhere. Rehearsals started the next week, and we rehearsed in the classroom because the playhouse would not open their doors for us until we got all the little bugs out of our performance. By little bugs, I mean our tendency to accidentally knock over the props. The props had been made about 15 years ago when the play was in its first year by Toby Bush, a sort of roving handyman who had done a few projects for the playhouse in the past. He was a roving handyman because he drank beer all day long while he worked. And by about 2 o'clock or so, he would really be flying. I guess he could not see straight because he had accidentally whacked his fingers with the hammer at least once a day. Whenever that happened, he had thrown down the hammer and jumped up and down, holding his finger, cursing everyone from his mother to the devil. When he finally calmed down, he had another beer to soothe the pain before going back to work. His knuckles were the size of walnuts, permanently swollen from the years of whacking, and no one was willing to hire him on a permanent basis. The only reason Hugbert had hired him at all was because he was far and away the lowest bidder in town. But Egbert would not allow drinking or cursing, and Toby really did not know how to work with such a strict environment. As a result, the work was kind of sloppy, though it was not obvious right off the bat. After a few years, the props began to fall apart, and Egbert took it upon himself to keep the things together. But while Egbert was good at thumping the Bible, he was not too good at thumping nails, and the props had bent, rusty nails sticking out all over, poking through the plywood in so many places that we had to be careful to walk especially where we were supposed to. If we bumped them the wrong way, we would either cut ourselves or the props would topple over, making little nail holes all over the stage floor. After a couple of years, the playhouse stage had to be resurfaced, and though they could not exactly close their doors to Hugbert, they made a deal with him to be more careful in the future. That meant we had to practice in the classroom until we had worked out the little box. Fortunately, Hugbert was not involved in the actual production of the play. Because all of his ministering duties, that role fell to Miss Garber, and the first things he told us to do was to memorize our lines as quickly as possible. We didn't have as much time as was usually allotted for rehearsals because Thanksgiving came on the last possible day in November, and Egbert did not want the play to be performed too close to Christmas, so as not to interfere with its true meaning. That left us only 3 weeks to get the play just right, which was about a week shorter than usual. The rehearsals began at 3 o'clock, and Jamie knew all her lines the first day there, which was not really surprising. What was surprising was that she knew all of my lines too, as well as everyone else's. We would be going over a scene, she would be doing it without the script, and I'd be looking down at a stack of pages, trying to figure out what my next line should be. And whenever I looked up, she had this real shiny look about her, as if waiting for a burning bush or something. The only lines I knew were the mute bombs, at least on that first day, and all of a sudden, I was actually envious of Eddie, at least in that regard. This was going to be a lot of work, not exactly what I had expected when I had signed up for the class. My noble feelings about doing the play had worn off by the second day of rehearsals. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, my friends did not understand it at all, and they had been riding me since they had found out. "You are doing what?" Eric asked when he learned about it. "You are doing the play with Jamie Sullivan? Are you insane or just plain stupid?" I sort of mumbled that I had a good reason, but he would not let it drop. And he told everyone around us that I had a crush on her. I denied it, of course. We just made them assume it was true. And they would laugh at all the louder and tell the next person they saw. The stories kept getting wilder too. By lunchtime, I had heard from Sally that I was thinking of getting engaged. I actually think Sally was jealous about it. She had a crush on me for years, and the feeling might have been mutual, except for the fact that she had a glass eye, and that was something I just couldn't ignore. Her bad eye reminded me of something you'd see stuffed into the head of a mounted owl in a tacky antique shop, and to be honest, it sort of gave me the willies. I guess that was when I started to resent Jamie again. I know it was not her fault, but I was the one who was taking the arrows for Hugbert, who had not exactly gone out of his way the night of homecoming to make me feel welcome. I began to stumble through my lines in class for next few days, not really even attempting to learn them, and occasionally I would crack a joke or two which everyone laughed at, except for Jamie and Miss Garber. After rehearsal was over, I would head home to put the play out of my mind, and I would not even bother to pick up the script. Instead, I would joke with my friends about the weird things Jamie did and tell fibs about how it was Miss Garber who had forced me into the whole thing. Jamie, though, was not going to let me off that easy. She got me right where it hurts, right smack in the old ego. I was out with Eric on Saturday night following Beaufort's third consecutive state championship in football. About a week after rehearsals had started, we were hanging out at the waterfront outside of Cecil's diner, eating hush puppies and watching people cruising in their cars. When I saw Jamie walking down the street, she was still 100 yards away, turning her head from side to side, wearing that old brown sweater again, and carrying her Bible in one hand. It must have been 9 o'clock or so, which was late for her to be out, and it was even stranger to see her in this part of town. I turned my back to her and pulled the collar up on my jacket, but even Margaret, who had banana pudding where her brain should have been, was smart enough to figure out who she was looking for. "Landon, your girlfriend is here." "She is not my girlfriend," I said. "I don't have a girlfriend." "Your fiancée, then." "I guess she would talk to Sally, too." "I'm not engaged," I said. "Now knock it off." I glanced over my shoulder to see if she had spotted me, and I guess she had. She was walking towards us. I pretended not to notice. "Here she comes," Margaret said, and giggled. "I know," I said. 20 seconds later, she said it again. "She is still coming. I told you she was quick." "I know," I said through gritted teeth. "If it wasn't for her legs, she could almost drive you as crazy as Jamie." I glanced around again, and this time Jamie knew I had seen her, and she smiled and waved at me. I turned away, and a moment later she was standing right beside me. "Hello, Landon," she said to me, oblivious of my scorn. "Hello, Eric." Margaret. She went around the group. Everyone sort of mumbled hello and tried not to stare at the Bible. Eric was holding a beer, and he moved it behind his back so she wouldn't see it. Jamie could even make Eric feel guilty if she was close enough to him. They had been neighbors at one time, and Eric had been on the receiving end of her talks before. Behind her back, he called her the Salvation Lady, in obvious reference to the Salvation Army. She would have been a brigadier general, he liked to say, but when she was standing in front of him, it was another story. In his mind, she had in with God, and he did not want to be in her bad graces. "How are you doing, Eric? I haven't seen you around much recently." She said this as if she still talked to him all the time. He shifted from one foot to the other and looked at his shoes, playing that guilty look for all it was worth. "Well, I haven't been to church lately," he said. Jamie smiled that gritty smile. "Well, that's okay. I suppose as long as it does not become a habit or anything, it won't." Now, I have heard of confession, that thing when Catholics sit behind a screen and tell the priest about all their sins, and that's the way Eric was when he was next to Jamie. For a second, I thought he was going to call her ma'am. You want beer? Margaret asked. I think she was trying to be funny, but no one laughed. Jamie put her hand to her hair, tugging gently at her bun. Oh, no, not really. Thank you, though. She looked directly at me with a really sweet glow, and right away I knew I was in trouble. I thought she was going to ask me off to the side or something, which, to be honest, I thought would turn out better, but I guess that was not in her plans. Well, you did really well this week at rehearsals, she said to me. I know you've got a lot of lines to learn, but I'm sure you are going to get them all real soon. And I just wanted to thank you for volunteering like you did. You are a real gentleman. Thanks, I said, a little knot forming in my stomach. I tried to be cool, but all my friends were looking right at me, suddenly wondering if I had been telling the truth about Miss Garber, forcing it on me and everything. I hoped they missed it. Your friends should be proud of you, Jamie added, putting that thought to rest. Oh, we are, Eric said, pouncing, very proud. He is a good guy. That Landon, what with his volunteering and all. Oh no. Jamie smiled at him, then turned back to me again, her old cheerful self. I also wanted to tell you that if you need any help, you can come by any time. We can sit on the porch like we did before and go over your lines if you need it to. I saw Eric mouth the words like we did before to Margaret. This really was not going well at all. By now, the pit in my stomach was as big as Paul Bunyan's bowling ball. That's okay, I mumbled, wondering how I could scream my way out of this. I can learn them at home. Well, sometimes it helps if someone is there to read with you, Landon, Eric offered. I told you he would stick it to me even though he was my friend. No, really, I said to him. I'll learn the lines on my own. Maybe, Eric said, smiling. You two should practice in front of the orphans. Once you've got it down a little better, sort of a dress rehearsal, you know, I'm sure they would love to see it. You could practically see Jamie's mind start clicking at the mention of the word orphans. Everyone knew her hot button was, do you think so? She asked. Eric nodded seriously. I'm sure of it. Landon was the one who thought of it first. But I knew that if I was orphan, I would love something like that, even if it was not exactly the real thing. Me too, Margaret chimed in. As they spoke, the only thing I could think was that scene from Julius Caesar where Brutus stabs him in the back. It too, Eric. It was Landon's idea? She asked, furrowing her brow. She looked at me and I could tell she was still mulling it over, but Eric was not about to let me off the hook that easy, now that he had me flopping on the deck. The only thing left to do was got me. You'd like to do that, wouldn't you, Landon? He said. Helping the orphans, I mean. It was not exactly something you could answer no to, was it? I reckon so, I said under my breath, starting at my best friend. Eric, despite the remedial classes he was in, would have been one hell of a chess player. Good, then, it's all settled. That's if it's okay with you, Jamie. His smile was sweet. It could have flavored half of RC Cola in the county. Well, yes, I suppose I'll have to talk to Miss Garber and the director of the orphanage, but if they say it's okay, I think it would be a fine idea. And the thing was, you could tell she was really happy about it. Checkmate. The next day, I spent 14 hours memorizing my lines, cursing my friends, and wondering how my life had spun so out of control. My senior year certainly was not turning out the way I thought it would when it began. But if I had to perform for a bunch of orphans, I certainly did not want to look like an idiot. Chapter 6. The first thing we did was talk to Miss Garber about our plans for the orphans, and she thought it was a marvelous idea. That was her favorite word, by the way, marvelous after. She had greeted you with hello. On Monday, when she realized that I knew all my lines, she said marvelous. And for the next 2 hours, whenever I had finished up a scene, she would say it again. By the end of the rehearsal, I had heard it about 4 zillion times. But Miss Garber actually went our idea one better. She told the class that we were doing, and she asked if other members of the cast would be willing to do their parts as well, so that the orphans could really enjoy the whole thing. The way she asked meant that they really did not have a choice, and she looked around the class, waiting for someone to nod so she could make it official. No one moved a muscle, except for Eddie. Somehow, he had inhaled a bug up his nose at that exact moment, and he sneezed violently. The bug flew out his nose, shot across his decks, and landed on the floor right by Norma Jean's leg. She jumped out of her chair and screamed out loud, and the people on either side of her shouted, "Ew, gross!" The rest of the class started looking around and craning their necks, trying to see what happened. And for the next 10 seconds, there was total pandemonium in the classroom. For Miss Garber, that was as good of an answer as she needed. Marvelous, she said, closing the discussion. Jamie, meanwhile, was getting really excited about performing for the orphans. During a break in rehearsals, she pulled me aside and thanked me for thinking of them. "There is no way you would know," she said almost conspiratorially, "but I have been wondering what to do for the orphanage this year. I have been praying about it for months now because I want this Christmas to be most special one of all." "Why is this Christmas so important?" I asked her, and she smiled patiently, as if I had asked a question that did not really matter. "It just is," she said simply. The next step was to talk it over with Mr. Jenkins, the director of the orphanage. Now, I had never met with Jenkins before, being that the orphanage was in Moorhead City, which was across the bridge from Beaufort, and I had never had any reason to go there. When Jamie surprised me with the news the following day that we'd be meeting him later that evening, I was sort of worried that I wasn't dressed nice enough. I know it was an orphanage, but a guy wants to make a good impression. Even though I was not as excited about it as Jamie was, no one was as excited as Jamie. I did not want to be regarded as the Grinch who ruined Christmas for the orphans either. Before we went to the orphanage for our meeting, we had to walk to my house to pick my mom's car. And while there, planned on changing into something a little nicer, the walk took about 10 minutes or so, and Jamie did not say much along the way, at least until we got to my neighborhood. The homes around mine were all large and well kept, and she asked who lived where and how old the houses were. I answered her questions without much thought. But when I opened the front door to my house, I suddenly realized how different this world was compared with her own. She had a shocked expression on her face as she looked around the living room, taking in her surroundings. No doubt, it was the fanciest home she had ever been in. A moment later, I saw her eyes travel to the paintings that lined the walls, my ancestors, so to speak. As with many southern families, my entire lineage could be traced in dozen faces that lined the walls. She stared at them, looking for a resemblance, I think, then turned her attention to the furnishings, which still looked practically new even after 20 years. The furniture had been handmade, assembled, or carved from mahogany and cherry, and designed specifically for each room. It was nice, I had to admit, but it was not something I really thought about. To me, it was just a house. My favorite part of it was the window in my room that led to the porch on the upper level. That was my escape hatch. I showed her around, though giving her a quick tour of the sitting room, the library, the den, and the family room. Jamie's eyes growing wider with each new room. My mom was out on the sun porch, slipping a mint julep and reading, and heard us poking around. She came back inside to say hello. I think I told you that every adult in town adored Jamie, and that included my mom. Even though Hugbert was always giving the kinds of sermons that had our family's name written all over them, my mom never held it against Jamie because of how sweet she was. So they talked while I was upstairs rifling through my closet for a clean shirt and a tie. Back then, boys wear ties a lot, especially when they were meeting someone in a position of authority. When I came back down the stairs, fully dressed, Jamie had already told my mom about the plan. It is a wonderful idea, Jamie said, beaming at me. Landon's really got a special heart. My mom, after making sure she had heard Jamie correctly, faced me with her eyebrows raised. She stared at me like I was an alien. So, this was your idea? My mom asked. Like everyone else in the town, she knew Jamie did not lie. I cleared my throat, thinking of Eric and what I still wanted to do to him. It involved molasses, fire, ants, by the way. Kind of, I said. Amazing. It was the only word she could get out. She did not know the details, but she knew I must have been boxed into a corner to do something like this. Mothers always know stuff like that, and I could see her peering closely at me and trying to figure it out. To escape her inquisitive gaze, I checked my watch, feigned surprise, and casually mentioned to Jamie that we would better be going. My mom got the car keys from her pocketbook and handed them to me, still giving me the once over as we headed out the door. I breathed a sigh of relief, imagining that I had somehow gotten away with something. But as I walked Jamie to the car, I heard my mother's voice again. "Come on over any time, Jamie," my mom shouted. "You are always welcome here. Even mothers could stick it to you sometimes." I was still shaking my head as I got in the car. "Your mother is a wonderful lady," Jamie said. I started the engine. "Yeah," I said, "I guess so. And your house is beautiful." "Uh-huh. You should count your blessings." "Oh," I said, "I do. I'm practically the luckiest guy alive." Somehow, She did not catch the sarcastic tone of my voice. We got to the orphanage just about the time it was getting dark. We were a couple of minutes early, and the director was on the phone. It was an important call, and he could not meet with us right away, so we made ourselves comfortable. We were waiting on a bench in the hallway outside his door. When Jamie turned to me, her Bible was in her lap. I guess she wanted it for support, but then again, maybe it was just her habit. "You did really well today," she said. "With your lines, I mean." "Thanks," I said, feeling proud and dejected at exactly same time. "I still have not learned my beats though," I offered. There was no way we could practice those on the porch, and I hoped she was not going to suggest it. "You will. They are easy once you know you all the words." "I hope so." Jamie smiled, and after a moment, she changed the subject, sort of throwing me off track. "Do you ever think about the future, Landon?" she asked. I was startled by her question because it sounded so ordinary. "Yes, sure, I guess so," I answered cautiously. "Well, what do you want to do with your life?" I shrugged, a little wary of where she was going with things. "I don't know it. I have not figured that part out. I'm going to UNC next fall. At least, I hope so. I have to get accepted first." "You will," she said. "How do you know?" "Because I have prayed for that too." When she said it, I thought we were heading into a discussion about power of prayer and faith, but Jamie tossed yet another curveball at me. "How about after college? What do you want to do then?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "Maybe I'll be a one-armed lumberjack." She did not think it was funny. "I think you should become a minister," she said seriously. "I think you are good with people, and they would respect what you have to say." Though the concept was absolutely ridiculous, with her, I just knew it came from the heart, and she intended it as a compliment. "Thanks," I said. "I don't know if I'll do that, but I'm sure I'll find something." It took a moment for me to realize that the conversation had stalled and that it was my turn to ask a question. "How about you? What do you want to do in the future?" Jamie turned away and got a far off gaze in her eyes, making me wonder what she was thinking. But it vanished almost as quickly as it came. "I want to get married," she said quietly. "And when I do, I want my father to walk me down the aisle, and I want everyone I know to be there. I want the church bursting with people. That's all." Though I was not averse to the idea of marriage, it seemed kind of silly to hope for that as your life's goal. "Yes," she said, "that's all I want." The way she answered made me suspect that she thought she would end up like Miss Garver. I tried to make her feel better, even though it still seemed silly to me. "Well, you'll get married someday. You'll meet some guy and the two of you will hit it off. And he will ask you to marry him. And I'm sure that your father will be happy to walk you down the aisle." I did not mention the part about having a big crowd in the church. I guess it was the one thing that even I could not imagine. Jamie thought carefully about my answer, really pondering the way I said it, though I did not know why. "I hope so," she said finally. I could tell she did not want to talk about it anymore. Don't ask me how. So I moved on to something new. "So, how long have you been coming to the orphanage?" I asked conversationally. 7 years now. I was 10 years old the first time I came. I was younger than lots of kids here. Do you enjoy it or does it make you sad? Both. Some of the children here came from really horrible situations. It's enough to break your heart when you hear about it. But when they see you come in with some books from library or a new game to play, their smiles just takes all the sadness away. It's the greatest feeling in the world. She practically glowed when she spoke, though she was not saying it to make me feel guilty. That was the that was exactly the way I felt. It was one of the reasons it was so hard to put up with her. But by then I was getting fairly used to it. She could twist you every way but normal. I'd come to learn. At that moment, Mr. Jenkins opened the door and invited us in. The office looked almost like a hospital room, with a black and white tile floors, white walls and ceilings, a metal cabinet against the wall where the bed would normally have been. There was a metal desk that looked like it had been stamped off the assembly line. It was almost neurotically clean of anything personal. There was not a single picture or anything. Jamie introduced me and I shook Mr. Jenkins' hand. After we sat down, Jamie did most of the talking. They were old friends. You could see that right off. And Mr. Jenkins had given her a big hug as soon as she had entered. After smoothing out her skirt, Jamie explained our plan. Now, Mr. Jenkins had seen the play a few years back and he knew exactly what she was talking about almost as soon as she started. But even though Mr. Jenkins liked Jamie a lot and knew she meant well, he did not think it was a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea, he said. That's how I knew what he was thinking. Why not? Jamie asked. Her brow furrowed. She seemed genuinely perplexed by his lack of enthusiasm. Mr. Jenkins picked up a pencil and started tapping on his desk, obviously thinking about how to explain himself. In the time, he put down the pencil and sighed. Even though it's a wonderful offer, and I know you'd like to do something special, the play is about a father who eventually comes to realize how much he loves his daughter. He let that sink in for a moment and picked up the pencil again. Christmas is hard enough around here without reminding the kids of what they are missing. I think that if the children see something like that, he did not even have to finish. Jamie put her hands to her mouth. Oh my, she said right away. You are right. I hadn't thought about that. Neither had I. To tell you the truth, but it was obvious right off the bat that Mr. Jenkins made sense. He thanked us anyway and chatted for a while about what he planned to do instead. We'll have a small tree and a few gifts, something that all of them can share. You are welcome to visit Christmas Eve. After we said our goodbyes, Jamie and I walked in silence without saying anything. I could tell she was sad. The more I hung around Jamie, the more I realized she had lots of different emotions. She was not always cheerful and happy. Believe it or not, that was the first time I recognized that in some ways she was just like the rest of us. I'm sorry, it did not work out, I said softly. I am too. She had that faraway look in her eyes again, and it was a moment before she went on. I just wanted to do something different for them this year. Something special that they would remember forever. I thought for sure this was it, she sighed. The Lord seems to have a plan that I just don't know about it. She was quiet for a long time and I looked at her. Seeing Jamie feeling bad was almost worse than feeling bad because of her. Unlike Jamie, I deserved to feel bad about myself. I knew what kind of person I was. But with her, while we are here, do you want to stop in to see the kids? I asked in silence. It was the only thing I could think to do that might make her feel better. I could wait out here while you talk to them, or go to the car if you want. Would you like to visit them with me? She asked suddenly. To be honest, I was not sure I could handle it, but I knew she really wanted me there. And she was feeling so down, the words came out automatically. Sure, I'll go. They'll be in the rec room now. That's where they usually are at this time, she said. We walked down to the corridors to the end of the hall, where two doors opened into a good-sized room. Perched in the far corner was a small television with about 30 metal folding chairs placed all around it. The kids were sitting in the chairs, crowded around it, and you could tell that only the ones in the front row had a good view of the thing. I glanced around. In the corner was an old ping pong table. The surface was cracked and dusty, the net nowhere to be seen. A couple of empty styrofoam cups sat on the top of it, and I knew it had not been used in months, maybe years. Along the wall next to the ping pong table were a set of shelves, with a few toys here and there, blocks and puzzles, a couple of games. There were not too many, and the few that were there looked as if they had been in this room for a long time. Along the near walls were small, individual desks piled with newspapers, scribbled on with crayons. We stood in the doorway for just a second. We hadn't been noticed yet, and I asked what the newspaper were for. They don't have coloring books, she whispered. So they use newspapers. She did not look at me as she spoke. Instead, her attention was directed at the kids. She had begun to smile again. Are these all the toys they have? I asked. She nodded. Yes, except for the stuffed animals. They are allowed to keep those in their rooms. This is where the rest of the things are kept. I guess she was used to it. To me, though, the sparseness of the room made the whole thing depressing. I could not imagine growing up in a place like this. Jamie and I finally walked into the room, and one of the kids turned around at the sound of our steps. He was about 8 or so, with red hair and freckles, his two front teeth missing. Jamie, he shouted happily when he saw her, and all of a sudden, all the other heads turned. The kids ranged in age from about 5 to 12, more boys than girls. After 12, they had to be sent to live with foster parents, I later learned. Hey Roger, Jamie said in response. How are you? With that, Roger and some of the others began to crowd around us. A few of the other kids ignored us and moved closer to the television now that there was free seats in the front row. Jamie introduced me to one of the older kids who had come up and asked if I was her boyfriend. By his tone, I think that he had the same opinion of Jamie that most of the kids in our high school had. He's just a friend, she said. but he is very nice. Over the next hour, we visited the children. I got a lot of questions about where I lived and whether my house was big or what kind of car I owned. And when we finally had to leave, Jamie promised that she would be back soon. I noticed that she did not promise I would be with her. While we were walking back to the car, I said, "They are a nice bunch of kids." I shrugged awkwardly. "I'm glad that you want to help them." Jamie turned to me and smiled. She knew there was not much to add after that, but I could tell she was still wondering what she was going to do for them that Christmas. Chapter 7. By early December, just over 2 weeks into rehearsals, the sky was winter dark before Miss Garber would let us leave, and Jamie asked me if I wouldn't mind walking her home. I don't know why she wanted me to. Beaufort was not exactly a hotbed of criminal activity back then. The only murder I have ever heard about had occurred 6 years earlier when a guy was stabbed outside of Maurice Tavern, which was a hangout for people like Liu, by the way, for an hour or so. It caused quite a stir, and phone lines buzzed all over town, while nervous women wondered about a possibility of crazed lunatic wandering the streets, preying on innocent victims. Doors were locked, guns were loaded, men sat by the front windows, looking for everyone out of the ordinary who might be creeping down the street. But the whole thing was over before the night was through when the guy walked into the police station to give himself up, explaining that it was a bar fight that got out of hand. Evidently, the victim had waltzed on a bet. The guy was charged with second-degree murder and got 6 years in the state penitentiary. The policemen in our town had the most boring jobs in the world, but they still liked to strut around with a swagger or sit in coffee shops while they talked in about the brick crime as if they had cracked the case of the Lindbergh baby. But Jamie's house was on the way to mine, and I could not say no without hurting her feelings. It was not that I liked her or anything. I don't get the wrong idea. But when you have had to spend a few hours a day with someone and you are going to continue doing that for at least another week, you don't want to do anything that might make the next day miserable for either of you. The play was going to be performed that Friday and Saturday, and lots of people were already talking about it. Miss Garver had been so impressed by Jamie and me that she kept telling everyone it was going to be the best play the school had ever done. She had a real flair for promotion too, we found out. We had one radio station in town, and they interviewed her over the air not once but twice. "It's going to be marvelous," she pronounced, "absolutely marvelous." She had also called the newspaper and they had agreed to write an article about it, primarily because of the Jamie Hugbert connection. Even though everyone in town already knew about it, but Miss Garber was relentless, and just that day she told us the playhouse was going to bring in extra seats to accommodate the extra large crowd expected. The class sort of oohed and eyed like it was a big deal for or something. But then I guess it was to some of them. Remember, we had guys like Eddie in class. He probably thought that this would be the only time in his life when someone might be interested in him. The sad thing was, he was probably right. You might think I'd be getting excited about it too, but I really was not. My friends were still teasing me at school, and I had not had an afternoon off in what seemed like forever. The only thing that kept me going was the fact that I was doing the right thing. I know it is not much, but frankly, it was all I had. Occasionally, I even felt sort of good about it, though I never admitted it to anyone. I could practically imagine the angels in heaven standing around and staring wistfully down at me with little tears falling, filling the corners of their eyes, talking about how wonderful I was for all my sacrifices. So I was walking her home that first night, thinking about this stuff, when Jamie asked me a question. Is it true you and your friends sometimes go to the graveyard at night? Part of me was surprised that she was even interested, though it was not exactly a secret. It did not seem like the sort of thing she would care about at all. Yeah, I said, shrugging. Sometimes. What do you do there besides eat peanuts? I guess she knew about that too. I don't know, I said. Talk, joke around. It's just a place we like to go. Does it ever scare you? No, I answered. Why? Would it scare you? I don't know, she said. It might. Why? Because I would worry that I might do something wrong. We don't do anything bad there. I mean, we don't knock over the tombstones or leave our trash around, I said. I did not want to tell her about our conversations about Henry Preston because I knew that was not the sort of thing Jamie would want to hear about. Last week, Eric had wondered aloud how fast a guy like that could lie in bed and well, you know. Do you ever just sit around and listen to the sounds? She asked. Like the crickets chirping or the rustling of leaves when the wind blows? Or do you ever just lie on your backs and stare at the stars? Even though she was a teenager and had been for 4 years, Jamie did not know the first thing about teenagers. Trying to understand teenage boys for her was like trying to decipher the theory of relativity. Not really, I said. She nodded a little. I think that's what I'd do if I were there. If I ever go, I would just look around to really see the place or sit quietly and listen. This whole conversation struck me as strange, but it did not press it. And we walked in silence for a few minutes, and since she had asked a little about me, I sort of felt obliged to ask her about herself. She hadn't brought up the Lord's plan or anything, so it was the least I could do. So what do you do? I asked. Besides working with the orphans or helping critters or reading the Bible, it sounded ridiculous even to me, I admit, but that's what she did. She smiled at me. I think she was surprised by my question, and even more surprised at my interest in her. I do a lot of things. I study for my classes. I spend time with my dad. We play gin rummy now and then, things like that. Do you ever go off with friends and goof around? No, she said. And I could tell by the way she answered that, even to her, it was obvious that no one wanted her around much. I'll bet you are excited about going off to college next year, I said, changing the subject. It took her a moment to answer. I don't think I am going to go, she said. Matter of factly, her answer caught me off guard. Jamie had some of the highest grades in our senior class, and depending on how the last semester went, she might even end up valedictorian. We had a running pool going as to how many times she would mention the Lord's plan in her speech. By the way, my bet was 14, being that she only had 5 minutes. What about Mount Sermon? I thought that's where you were planning to go. You'd love a place like that, I offered. She looked at me with a twinkle in her eyes. You mean I'd fit right in there, don't you? Those curveballs she sometimes threw could smack you right between the eyeballs. I did not mean it that way, I said quickly. I just meant that I heard about how excited you were to be going there next year. She shrugged without really answering me. And to be honest, I don't know what to make of it. By then, we had reached the front of our house and we stopped on the sidewalk out front. From where I was standing, I could make out Hugbert's shadow in the living room through the curtains. The lamp was on, and he was sitting on the sofa by the window. His head was bowed, like he was reading something. I assumed it was the Bible. Thank you for walking me home, Landon, she said, and she glanced up at me for a moment before finally starting up the walk. As I watched her go, I could not help but think that all of the times I had ever talked to her, this was the strangest conversation we have ever had. Despite the oddness of some of her answers, she seemed practically normal. The next night, as I was walking her home, she asked me about my father. He is all right, I reckon, I said, but he is not around much. Do you miss that? Not growing up with him around? Sometimes. I miss my mom too, she said. Even though I have never even knew her, it was the first time I had ever considered that Jamie and I might have something in common. I let that sink in for a while. It must be hard for you, I said sincerely. Even though my father is a stranger to me, at least he is still around. She looked up at me as we walked, then faced forward again. She tugged gently at her hair again. I was beginning to notice that she did this whenever she was nervous or was not sure of what to say. It is sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I love my father with all my heart. But there are times when I wonder what it would have been like to have a mother around. I think she and I would have been able to talk about things in a way that my father and I can't. I assumed she was talking about boys. It was not until later that I learned how wrong I was. What's it like living with your father? Is he like how he is in church? No. He's actually got a pretty good sense of humor. Hugbert, I blurted out. I couldn't even imagine it. I think she was shocked to hear me call him by his first name. But she left me off the hook and didn't respond to my comment. Instead, she said, "Don't look so surprised. You will like him once you get to know him." I doubt if I'll ever get to know him. You never know, Landon, she said, smiling, what the Lord's plan is. I hated when she said things like that. With her, you just knew she talked to the Lord every day, and you never knew what the big guy upstairs had told her. She might even have a direct ticket into a heaven. If you know what I mean, being as how good a person she was. How would I get to know him? I asked. She did not answer. But she smiled to herself as if she knew some secret that she was keeping from me. Like I said, I hated it when she did that. The next night, we talked about her Bible. Why do you always carry it with you? I asked. Now I assumed she carried the Bible around simply because she was the minister's daughter. I wasn't that big of an assumption, given how Hugbert felt about scripture and all. But Bible she carried was old and the cover was kind of ratty looking, and I figured that she had be the kind of person who would buy a new one every year or so just to help out the Bible publishing industry or to show her renewed dedication to the Lord or something. She walked a few steps before answering. It was my mother's, she said simply. Oh, I said it like I had stepped on someone's pet turtle and squashing it under my shoe. She looked at me. It's okay, Landon. How could you have known? I'm sorry, I asked. Don't be. You didn't mean anything by it. She paused. My mother and father were given this Bible for their wedding, but my mom was the one who claimed it first. She read it all the time, especially whenever she was going through a hard time in her life. I thought about the miscarriages. Jamie went on. She loved to read it at night before she went to sleep, and she had it with her in hospital where I was born. When my father found out that she had died, he carried the Bible and me out of the hospital at the same time. I am sorry, I said again. Whenever someone tells you something bad, it is the only thing you can think to say, even if you have already said it before. It just gives me a way to be a part of her. Can you understand that? She wasn't saying it sadly, just more to let me know the answer to my question. Somehow that made it worse. After she told me the story, I thought of her growing up with Hugbert again, and I did not really know what to say as I was thinking about my answer, though. I heard a car blare its horn from behind us, and both Jamie and I stopped and turned around at the same time. As we heard it pulling over to the side, Eric and Margaret were in the car. Eric on the driver's side and Margaret on the side closest to us. Well, looky who we have here, Eric said as he leaned over on the steering wheel so that I could see his face. I hadn't told him that I had been walking Jamie home, and in the curious way that teenage mind works, this new development took priority over anything that I was feeling about Jamie's story. Hello, Eric. Hello, Margaret, Jamie said cheerfully. Walking her home, Landon, I could see the little devil behind Eric's smile. Hey, Eric, I said, wishing he had never seen me. It is a beautiful night for strolling, is not it? Eric said. I think that because Margaret was between him and Jamie, he felt a little bolder than he usually was in Jamie's presence, and there was no way he could let this opportunity pass without sticking it to me. Jamie looked around and smiled. Yes, it is. Eric looked around too, with his wistful look in his eyes before taking a deep breath. I could tell he was faking it. Boy, it is really nice out there. He sighed and glanced towards us as he shrugged. I would offer you a ride, but it would not be half as nice as actually walking under the stars. And I would not want you two to miss it. He said this like he was doing us both a favor. Oh, we are almost to my house anyway, Jamie said. I was going to offer Landon a cup of cider. Would you like to meet us there? We have plenty. A cup of cider? At her house? She hadn't mentioned that. I put my hands in my pocket, wondering if this could get any worse. Oh, no, that's all right. We were just heading off to Cecil's diner. On a school night? She asked innocently. Oh, we won't be out too late, he promised, but we should probably be going. Enjoy your cider, you two. Thanks for stopping to say hello, Jamie said, waving. Eric got the car rolling again, but slowly. Jamie probably thought he was a safe driver. He really was not, though he was good at getting out of trouble when he had crashed into something. I remember one time when he had told his mother that a cow had jumped out in front of the car, and that's why the grill and the fender were damaged. It happened so fast, Mom. The cow came out of nowhere. It just darted out in front of me, and I could not stop in time. Now everyone knows cows don't exactly dart anywhere, but his mother believed in him. She used to be a head cheerleader, too, by the way. Once they had pulled out of sight, Jamie turned to me and smiled. You have nice friends, Landon. Sure, I do. Notice the careful way I phrased my answer after dropping Jamie off. No, I didn't stay for cider. I started back to my house, grumbling the whole time. But then Jamie's story had left me completely, and I could practically hear my friends laughing about me all the way from Cecil's diner. See what happens when you are a nice guy. By the next morning, everyone at school knew I was walking Jamie home, and this started up a new round of speculation about the two of us. This time, it was even worse than before. It was so bad that I had to spend my lunch break in the library just to get away from it. The rehearsal was at the playhouse. It was the last one before the show opened, and we had a lot to do. Rather, right after school, the boys in drama class had to load all the props in the classroom into the rented truck to take them to the playhouse. The only problem was that Eddie and I were the only two boys, and he is not exactly the most coordinated individual in the history. We'd be walking through a doorway, carrying one of the heavier items, and his hubile body would work against him. At every critical moment, when I really needed his help to balance the load, he would stumble over some dust or an insect on the floor, and the weight of the prop would come crashing down my fingers, pinching them against the door jamb in the most painful way possible. Sorry, he'd say. Did that hurt? I would stifle the curses rising in my throat and bite out, just don't do it again. But he could not stop himself from stumbling around any more than he could stop the rain from falling. By the time we had finished loading and unloading everything, my fingers looked like Toby's, the roving handyman, and the worst thing was I did not even get a chance to eat before rehearsal started. Moving the props had taken 3 hours, and we did not finish setting them up until a few minutes before everyone else arrived to begin. With everything else that had happened that day, suffice it to say, I was in pretty bad mood. I ran through my lines without even thinking about them, and Miss Garber did not say the word marvelous all night long. She had this concerned look in her eyes afterward, but Jamie simply smiled and told her not to worry, that everything was going to be alright. I knew Jamie was just trying to make things better for me, but when she asked to walk her home, I told her no. The playhouse was in the middle of town, and to walk her home, I would have to walk a good distance out of my way. Besides, I didn't want to be seen again doing it. But Miss Garver had overheard Jamie's request and she said very firmly that I'd be glad to do it. You two can talk about the play, she said. Maybe you can work out the kinks. By kinks, of course, she meant me specifically. So, once more, I ended up walking Jamie home, but she could tell I was not really in the mood to talk because I wanted a little bit in front of her. My hands in my pockets without even really turning back to see whether she was following. It went this way for the first few minutes, and I hadn't said a word to her. You are not in a very good mood, are you? She finally asked. You didn't even try tonight. You don't miss a thing, do you? I said sarcastically without looking at her. Maybe I can help, she offered. She said it kind of happily, which made me even little angrier. I doubt it, I snapped. Maybe if you told me what was wrong. I didn't let her finish. Look, I said, stopping, turning to her face. I've just spent all day hauling crap. I haven't eaten since lunch, and now I have to trek a mile out of my way to make sure you get home, when we both know you don't even need me to do it. It was the first time I had ever raised my voice to her, to tell you the truth. It felt kind of good. It had been building up for a long time. Jamie was too surprised to respond, and I went on. And the only reason I'm doing this is because of your father, who doesn't even like me. This whole thing is dumb, and I wish I had never agreed to do it. You are just saying this because you are nervous about the play. I cut her off with a shake of my head. Once I got on a roll, it was sometimes hard for me to stop. I could take her optimism and cheerfulness only so long, and today was not the day to push me too far. Don't you get it? I said, exasperated. I'm not nervous about the play. I just don't want to be here. I don't want to walk you home. I don't want my friends to keep talking about me, and I don't want to spend time with you. You keep acting like we are friends, but we are not. We are not anything. I just want the whole thing to be over so I can go back to my normal life. She looked hurt by my outburst, and to be honest, I couldn't blame her. I see, was all she said. I waited for her to raise her voice at me, to defend herself, to make her case again, but she didn't. All she did was look toward the ground. I think part of her wanted to cry, but she didn't. And I finally stalked away, leaving her standing by herself. A moment later, though, I heard her start moving too. She was about 5 yards behind me, the rest of the way to her house, and she didn't try to talk to me again until she started up the walkway. I was already moving down the sidewalk when I heard her voice. Thank you for walking me home, Landon, she called out. I winced as soon as she said it, even when I was mean to her face and said the most spiteful things. She could find some reason to thank me. She was just that kind of girl, and I think I actually hated her for it. Or rather, I think I hated myself.